Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, September 11th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, John Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 341 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, journalist Matt Kennard will join us to talk about Britain's role in the Israeli genocide, as well as London's increasingly draconian repression of activists supporting the rights of the Palestinian people. Later on in the program, John will take us through all the latest resistance news from Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. But before we go to the news, we wanted to talk about how we've been restricted from YouTube for a week starting today. Ali, take us through what's happened.
Hi, Nora. Hello, everyone. And of course, we hope many people are watching today, but for the first time since we started this live stream, nobody is watching on YouTube because YouTube took down 3 videos that we had posted from our channel. And as punishment, they have restricted us from posting anything on our YouTube channel for 7 days. That includes having the live stream. And as I said in an email we sent out just a little while ago, and a message we put on our social media accounts, we view this as blatant censorship. We reject YouTube's vague claims that we violated their community standards. As all of our viewers and readers know, our journalism is extremely professional, careful, factual, and we stand by it. So we view this as blatant political censorship. And as we've said many times on this program, in the United States, where we have the First Amendment, it's not the government, like in the UK or Germany or France, that can issue an order to silence you. The censorship is done by proxy through big tech, through companies like Google, which of course owns YouTube, and through the other platforms, which are completely unaccountable. So we view this as purely political censorship. Now, the 3 videos that were taken down were all segments that come from our colleague John Elmer's resistance reports, which you see every week, and we take great pains to do very carefully so that we can try to avoid this kind of censorship. John, tell us more about the videos that were taken down and what we do in order to try to remain within the rules to keep our program on air on YouTube.
Yeah, well, as anyone who's a regular listener knows, I'm telling you on every video that we have edited out any kind of graphic violence, any kind of loss of life or injury is all taken out. We understand that we're the target of censorship and we act accordingly. And we go above and beyond journalistic and broadcast standards to do that. Every single video is vetted. They're edited carefully. Tamara and I go through every video together, even after they're edited. The standards that we take are well within journalistic norms, and this is just blatant censorship. The videos are months old videos. They're important videos of a historic moment. And I think that it's really, even though we know this is that we have a target on us, it's still shocking to see how blatant this is, because we do take considerable efforts to protect our audience from graphic violence. That's not the point of what we do. And the community standards that were violated are not described. They don't tell you where it is. And it's a vague statement about violent criminal groups. So from our perspective, that would be the Israeli military, which shows their videos on loop on CNN and all over the North American and Western media. So it's just blatant censorship. It's appalling. Yeah. In a historic moment in time that makes it even, it just underscores it.
And I'll just say that, we've always understood this is the environment we work in, so-called Western democracy, where the censorship is getting more and more extreme. And we're actually going to talk about that with our guest today. We are fortunate that there are other platforms to stream on, and we're doing that now. And we're going to explore going forward how we can try to have even more platforms, just so that we can as it were, spread the risk, because we know that we can be censored at any time on any platform, but we refuse to be silenced, and we're going to do our best to continue to come to you, to bring you this program and this news and information for as long as we can.
And people have already been asking who can they complain to about this YouTube ban. I don't know if we have any ideas for our viewers and listeners? But.
Well, the process with these companies, they're so opaque. Like, even when when they take down a video or they say we've done a violation, there is a form where you can appeal. We don't know if it's read by a human, by a machine. We have no idea. There's no interaction. And in every case, I believe our appeal has been rejected, no matter how well we spell out the reasons why this was a completely unjust and unjustifiable act of censorship. So I really think the only way is for people to make noise, to, tweet at YouTube or to write to the company. I don't know if they care or not, but I think only by making noise, only by being as loud as we can in our collective rejection of this censorship, do we have really any chance of pushing back. But the system itself through which we can appeal is completely opaque and rigged, and we have never once been successful at appealing one of their completely unjustifiable removals of our videos.
And also, just to say, this just happened to us, so we are just responding in the moment to it. It just happened just before we went on air. So
so it's
follow us. We'll keep you posted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But the show will go on, right, Nora?
That's right. And there is a lot of show that we have today. So we have Matt Kennard with us. John has his resistance report. We have a lot to get through in a discussion section. There's so much that's happened this week. And before we go to all of that, let's look at the news. Here is a summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and the West Bank, and we'll share some reportage highlights from the Electronic Intifada's contributors there. Early Tuesday morning, while families were sleeping, Israel bombed the massive encampment in the sand dunes of Al-Mawasi in Khan Yunis, designated by Israel as a so-called safe zone or humanitarian area, with a series of airstrikes, killing at least 40 and injuring dozens more. Rescuers, including Palestinian civil defense, searched for survivors of the attack, digging through the sand with their bare hands. Witnesses told Al Jazeera that fires were burning and Israeli surveillance drones circled overhead while people searched for any sign of their loved ones. The heavy Israeli bombs, made in the United States and enthusiastically delivered by the Biden-Harris administration, obliterated at least 22 out of the 40 people killed so completely that their bodies were not even recoverable. Tents melted into the sand, leaving craters in the dunes up to 30 feet deep. A spokesperson for the Gaza Civil Defense Corps said that initial assessments suggest that the attack was, quote, one of the worst heinous massacres in this frenzied war. The spokesperson added that it was extremely difficult retrieving the bodies of people killed in the massacre. Israel claimed that Hamas had set up a command center in the encampment for displaced people. In a statement on Tuesday, Hamas flatly rejected Israel's claims. The political party stated, quote, this is a clear lie that aims to justify these ugly crimes. The resistance has denied several times that any of its members exist within civilian gatherings or using these places for military purposes. Videos showed displaced Palestinians who survived the massacre on Tuesday reconstructing tents out of wood, plastic, and cloth later in the day. Our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, reports that Israel has instructed civilians to move to Al-Mawasi, an open coastal area lacking infrastructure to meet the needs of displaced people, when issuing evacuation orders in other areas of Gaza. Israel most recently ordered Palestinians to evacuate to Al-Mawasi on August 24th, according to the UN. Israel has repeatedly struck facilities being used as shelters for displaced people in Gaza, often claiming without evidence that they were being used as command centers by Hamas and other resistance groups, despite the vast tunnel networks used by resistance fighters, Maureen writes. Over the weekend, the Israeli military attacked the Halima al-Sadiya school, sheltering hundreds of displaced Palestinians in Jabalia al-Nazla in northern Gaza. The attack, which occurred without warning on Saturday, killed 4 people and injured several others. That same day, 4 Palestinians, including a child, were killed when Israeli warplanes bombed the Amr ibn al-As school north of Gaza City, which was also being used as a shelter. The human rights group Euromed Monitor stated that, quote, since the beginning of August, the Israeli occupation army has bombed 16 schools being used as shelters in the Gaza Strip, noting that all but one of the targeted schools are in the northern half of Gaza. Maureen writes that, quote, the deliberate destruction of civilian infrastructure in Gaza's north, including facilities serving as shelters, is part of Israel's strategy to create a coercive environment in order to forcibly transfer the population to central and southern Gaza, according to Euromed. The rights group pointed to reports in Israeli media about a plan to depopulate northern Gaza drafted by Israeli reservist commanders and soldiers. The scheme, reportedly presented to Israel's cabinet and other senior officials, was spearheaded by Giora Eiland, the retired major general and close advisor to Israel's defense minister, who called for creating conditions for the spread of epidemics in Gaza as a form of biological warfare. It calls for an estimated 300,000 civilians to evacuate northern Gaza in a one-week period, after which the area would be besieged and Hamas fighters would be made to surrender or be killed. For much more on the attacks on Al-Mawasi and the critical situation in the north of Gaza, read Maureen Claire Murphy's latest report, Israel Kills 40 in Gaza Humanitarian Zone, on electronicintifada.net. Airstrikes and ground attacks continued against Palestinians across the northern and central strip this week, including in Deir al-Balah and in Gaza City. Attacks on Monday alone across Gaza killed more than 30 Palestinians. On Monday, Israel bombed an apartment building in western Gaza City and attacked the Jabalia refugee camp, killing 6 Palestinians, including 2 children. Hossam Shabat, a journalist working in northern Gaza, said on Monday that, quote, today at the massacre scene in northern Gaza, a young girl no more than a year old was killed. Her head was wide open and brain matter was exposed. Paramedics had to stuff her head with cloth so that her body can hold up to be buried. On Tuesday, hours after the massacre in Al-Mawasi Khan Yunis, Israeli airstrikes targeted a shelter in Burej refugee camp near Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza Strip. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed has been reporting constant tank shelling, airstrikes, and fire from helicopter gunships in and around Deir al-Balah over the past few days. Earlier in the week, the UN and its local partners in Gaza ended the second phase of the polio vaccination campaign, reaching more than 256,000 children in the southern cities of Rafah and Khan Yunis. The Israeli military ordered Palestinians in the northern city of Beit Lahia to be forcibly displaced amidst the beginning of the third phase of the polio vaccination campaign in the north. In preparation for the mass vaccination campaign, international humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, were denied permits by Israel to cross checkpoints into the north, according to Al Jazeera. The Geneva-based Euromed Human Rights Monitor stated that Israel is critically undermining Gaza's polio vaccination campaign in the north. On Tuesday, Israel bombed a food stall in the Tufah neighborhood located between 3 deconflicted centers designated as safe for providing polio vaccinations to children in northern Gaza, the rights group said. They stated that, quote, from the beginning of the polio vaccination campaign on September 1st, the Israeli army has ignored all calls for a humanitarian truce or a temporary cessation of attacks during vaccination hours. Instead, it has continued its military attacks on all areas of the Gaza Strip, from the north to the south, launching dozens of air raids targeting sites near vaccination centers in the southern, central, and now northern sections of the Strip. Mohamed Hadi, the United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Palestine, released a statement on Tuesday saying that 12 UN staff members, quote, whose movement was fully coordinated with the Israeli army and whose details were shared with them in advance, were stopped on its way to North Gaza on Monday to support the third phase of the Gaza Strip-wide polio vaccination campaign. While at the checkpoint, the team was informed that the Israeli army wanted to hold 2 of the UN staff members in the convoy for further questioning, Hadi said. The situation escalated quickly, with soldiers pointing their weapons directly toward the convoy personnel. Israeli troops encircled the convoy and fired shots before Israeli military tanks and a bulldozer, quote, proceeded to ram the UN vehicles from the front and from the back, compacting the convoy with the UN staff inside, according to Stefan Dujarric, spokesperson for the UN Secretary General. He added that the bulldozer dropped debris on the first vehicle, while Israeli soldiers threatened staff, making it impossible for them to safely exit the vehicles. The convoy remained held at gunpoint while senior-level UN officials attempted to de-escalate the situation with the Israelis. The two staff were eventually questioned one by one and then released. After 7.5 hours at the checkpoint, the convoy returned to base without being able to fulfill its humanitarian mission to support the polio campaign. Despite the assault on the UN convoy and the enormous obstacles for humanitarian aid missions in the north, the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the UN teams were able to vaccinate 77,000 children against polio on Tuesday. This week, we published a personal narrative from Gaza-based writer Saida Hamdona, who describes how being forcibly displaced multiple times is affecting her young children and her family's overall health. Saida writes, quote, "Zakaria, who's only 8, has started having difficulty speaking. It seems he grasped the realities of the tragedy we were living. He asked questions even philosophers couldn't answer. Why are we here? What did we do wrong? When the war ends, where will we live? Calamities rarely travel alone. Recently, hepatitis A has spread among the tents. Hepatitis A is most commonly transmitted through human waste. Like everyone else in the camp, we used the mosque bathroom. Some of my relatives contracted the disease as a result and suffered from its symptoms, which included a loss of appetite and an inability to taste food for 2 weeks. Without irony, doctors recommended avoiding canned foods, eating more vegetables, and consuming honey. As if they didn't know we can only have canned food, can only imagine the luxury of fresh vegetables, and are barely able to remember what honey looks like, let alone how it tastes. And we are relatively blessed, us, the displaced people. At least we have some bread and food in the south. Our relatives in the northern sector don't even have canned food or a loaf of bread. Despite the harsh conditions we have endured and continue to endure, we hold on to hope and faith that tomorrow will be better. We may have lost our homes and security, but we have not lost our humanity and dignity." That's from Saida Hamdona's feature, Dream of Returning Home Keeps Family Moving Forward, on electronicintifada.net. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers withdrew from Jenin refugee camp in the north after a 10-day raid in which essential infrastructure was destroyed, at least 21 Palestinians were killed, and more than 130 injured. Since the end of August, Israeli forces have besieged other refugee camps across the northern West Bank. Our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, writes that this past week, Israeli occupation forces killed both an American woman during a protest in Beita, a village near Nablus, and a 13-year-old Palestinian girl in a separate but nearby incident on Friday. In the latter incident, Bana Amjad Bakr was struck by a bullet in her chest while in her home during confrontations that erupted in Qaryut village, also near Nablus, after settlers raided and attacked the community. The girl's father said that she was shot by Israeli occupation forces while in her room with her sisters, the official Palestinian news agency Wafa reported. Defense for Children International Palestine stated that on the previous day, quote, Israeli forces shot and killed a 16-year-old Palestinian boy in the northern occupied West Bank and then desecrated his body. The teen, Majid Abu Zaina, quote, was shot in the leg by an Israeli soldier from a distance of 30 meters in Al-Farah refugee camp south of Tubas. Israeli soldiers approached Majid as he lay injured on the ground and prevented a Palestinian ambulance from reaching him, according to Defense for Children International Palestine. Majid pleaded with Israeli soldiers to let the ambulance help him, but they ignored him. And one of them ordered him to lift up his shirt, quote, which revealed a homemade explosive device that Majid was allegedly carrying. The soldier, quote, then shot Majid at point-blank range in the neck, killing him, according to the children's rights group. Maureen writes that video shows an Israeli military bulldozer moving the boy's body with its front blade. The soldiers operating the bulldozer drove around Al-Farah with the teen's body in the blade for an hour before dumping him in another area of the camp. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights said that the boy's abdomen was torn open while being carried by the bulldozer and his internal organs were exposed. His body was, quote, disfigured and unrecognizable when it was finally retrieved following the withdrawal of Israeli troops hours later. The U.S. citizen killed in Beta on Friday was identified as 26-year-old 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, a resident of Seattle, Washington. The International Solidarity Movement stated that 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 was an activist with the group and is the 18th person to be killed in the context of Beta's protests since 2020, following the establishment of Eviatar, a settlement outpost on village land. Israeli troops fired tear gas and live ammunition during confrontations that ensued following afternoon prayers held during the protest, forcing demonstrators to retreat toward the village. Demonstrators were congregated on the outskirts of the village, some 150 to 200 meters away from Israeli troops, according to Jonathan Pollock, an Israeli anti-occupation activist who was present when 𝐄𝐥𝐜 was shot in the head. The situation was quiet when a sniper positioned on a rooftop fired 2 live bullets, he said. Quote, I found her lying on the ground, bleeding from her head, Pollock said, adding that she had a very weak pulse. 𝐄𝐥𝐜 was evacuated to a hospital, but efforts to save her life failed. Saad Dahab, a resident of Beta, told Wafa news agency that after the shots rang out, quote, I saw the soldiers dancing happily at what they had done. That's all from Maureen Claire Murphy's report. Witness Israeli troops in West Bank intentionally killed U.S. activist on electronicintifada.net. Palestinians in Beta held a massive funeral for 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐜 on Monday. The U.S. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel said that Washington will not be conducting its own investigation into 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐜's execution in the occupied West Bank. Instead, he said that U.S. officials expect Israel to investigate itself. And U.S. President Joe Biden provided cover for Israel, suggesting last night that the bullet that hit 𝐓𝐡𝐞 in the head had ricocheted off the ground, calling it, quote, an accident. Meanwhile, after Israeli troops withdrew from Jenin, leaving massive destruction of roads and infrastructure, local residents helped clean up the streets and repair the damage. And funerals were held for resistance fighters who were killed during confrontations with Israeli soldiers in the 10-day invasion. In Tulkarem, the Israeli army partially withdrew last week, but reinvaded the city on Monday. The Palestine Red Crescent Society stated on Tuesday that Israeli forces assaulted members of their medical team in Tulkarem. Israeli soldiers, the physicians say, targeted one of their volunteer paramedics with live bullets while he was providing first aid to an injured person in Tulkarem camp. Israeli forces also arrested 2 EMTs from inside the Tulkarem Emergency Medical Services Center after storming and surrounding it, the Red Crescent added. The medics were eventually released. And finally, we wanted to bring you some images and videos from journalists and others in Gaza that highlight the resilience, joy, and determination of the Palestinian people. Kids in a makeshift tent classroom in the north, organized by the educational initiative Gaza Great Minds, showed off their English language skills.
I get up. I do movement. I watch cartoons. I play school. I go to bed.
And our dear contributor, Abu Bakr Abed, posted a photo of a magnificent work of art that his father, Wissam, made especially for the Electronic Intifada. It says, from Deir Balach, Gaza to the Electronic Intifada with love and hope. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. Hi, Ali. How are you? Already such a such
Yeah.
a busy day, but
Yeah, but we were so touched by that beautiful gesture from Abu Bakr and his father, and that really just got
yeah,
us right here. It was delightful. And then just, I believe it was yesterday was supposed to be the first day of school for
right.
for hundreds of thousands of children in Gaza. And of course, we know that education efforts are going on,
Yeah,
whether makeshift efforts like we saw or informal education efforts.
yeah,
Some of our writers and contributors are professionally teachers, and they continue to care for their students. I think of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, the late 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, murdered by Israel, who during the first weeks of this genocide, the first months, continued to work with his students,
yeah,
continued to support them and educate them and mentor them by WhatsApp. And I know that he's not alone. So I'm just, really thinking about all the students, all the educators, all the teachers in Gaza, and the hundreds of teachers who've been murdered and the schools that have been destroyed. But that will for education persists and continues, and it's just something Palestinians always hold on to.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, especially in the north, that has been just absolutely decimated. To see children enthusiastic about going back to any semblance of school that they can. There have been pictures that I've seen on social media of, these like little stalls in what used to be very bustling marketplaces in the north that are now kind of like haphazardly set up as, wherever they can, selling backpacks, and, just trying to hold on to any sort of notion of normal life, and to be able to provide that for children right now. I mean, I hear from parents in Gaza all the time that it's just impossible. And so, little acts of resistance include going to school and buying your kid a backpack.
Yeah.
I just
And there's a history to this,
Yeah.
not to take us too far off track, but remember that during the first Intifada in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Israel shut down all education in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip for almost 3 years.
That's right.
Everything from kindergarten to university was banned. Imagine children at such a young age missing 2 or 3 years of school, how devastating that is. And Palestinians organized informal education during the first Intifada. And so just the continuity of Israel's brutality, it's war against knowledge, it's war against the Palestinian people in every way, and their resistance through education, through reading and writing. I just think of that continuity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the underground schools. Okay, well, we have a full show. Ali, why don't you introduce our first guest?
Yes, and if you're just joining us, of course, you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abu Nerma here with my colleague, Nora Barrows-Friedman. And we're going to take a look now at how the British government is participating in the genocide in Gaza and also repressing activists and journalists who are exposing the state's complicity in the slaughter. Quite ironic topic for today, given the ban that we are facing on YouTube. And we're joined today by the journalist Matt Kennard. Matt is the co-founder and head of investigations at Declassified UK, a news website which focuses on British national security issues. He's the author of several books, including Irregular Army, which exposed neo-Nazis and other gangs recruited into the US Army, and most recently Silent Coup with Claire Provost on how corporations have overthrown democracy. Matt was previously a journalist at the Financial Times before he effectively became a whistleblower on the global financial system and the networks of client journalism that sustain it, eventually writing the book The Racket, which looks at how the US empire rigs the global economy for the benefit of its elite. And in that book, Matt wrote about his time in the West Bank, an experience which, like for many of us, was a formative one. Since its launch in 2019, Declassified UK has published many articles focusing on Palestine, including reporting on Britain's Israel lobby and exposing the participation of British military and intelligence organizations in the genocide in Gaza. And we're going to talk more about that today. But first, let's welcome Matt to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thanks for having me.
Matt.
It's good.
It's
Hi,
great.
Matt.
No,
you're
we
good.
can hear you now. And
Okay.
Matt, I've been following your work for a couple of years, so it's really nice to be able to speak to you now. And so let's get into it. Can you tell us more about the role that the UK has had and is currently playing in the genocide in Gaza, specifically in terms of intelligence and surveillance data for the Israeli army? And just before you get into that, you revealed at Declassified in May that the British Air Force, the Royal Air Force as it's called, had flown about 200 spy missions over Gaza since December. You wrote, quote, "All the British spy flights have taken off from RAF Akrotiri, the UK's sprawling airbase in Cyprus, and have been in the air for around 6 hours. Gaza sits around 30 minutes flight time from the base, so it is likely the RAF has gathered around 1,000 hours of surveillance footage over Gaza." How do you track these flights, and what do we know about their purpose?
Thanks, Ali. It's good to be here. I've been a big fan of Electronic Intifada for many years, so thanks for having me. So I'll start by the top line is Britain gets away, or people don't look at it so much because it's not a major contributor in terms of weapons. So it's dwarfed massively by the United States and Germany. But it's a key player in supporting the Israeli war machine through logistics and intelligence, as you mentioned. And this is all done mainly through this base on Cyprus, which is called RAF Akrotiri. Now, just a bit of background, Cyprus was made independent of Britain in 1960, or so the fable goes. But it actually wasn't made independent because what Britain did was retain 3% of the island and turned it into massive military and intelligence installations. And since the Gaza genocide has started, RAF Akrotiri, which is in the west of Cyprus, has become the major international hub for getting weapons, special forces and spies to Israel so they can participate in the genocide. And all this has been done in secret. So at Declassified, we're the only ones that have been reporting on this and revealing new information about it. And in fact, we've caused a big storm in Cyprus itself. There was a demonstration in Limassol, which is the second city in Cyprus, and it's right next to RAF Akrotiri. There was a massive demonstration there. There was a big demonstration actually at RAF Akrotiri, all based on the work we were doing. And none of it was covered in the mainstream media, and still hasn't. And this, I mean, as you guys will know through your work, that's not that surprising. But what surprised me about that was the president of Cyprus and the president of Northern Cyprus, because it became such an issue, had to make a comment, and it still didn't break into the mainstream media here. So what that means is they are complicit, because it shows that when journalism exposes the role that Britain is playing, and it's multifaceted, it's not just this, there is some pressure. If the mainstream media covered it in the same way that the Cypriot media covered our revelations, then there would be a pressure on the government to stop that access that they're providing to the US Air Force, to stop the spy flights, which are going up to 2 times a day. So Britain has got away with a lot, and a lot of the complicity is not known about because there's this focus on weapons, which is not the major part of Britain's role. And even recently, you know, there was great fanfare about the Labour government suspending 30 weapons licenses, but that was only 8% of the total weapons licenses that we provide them. Number one. Number two, it didn't involve anything we still supply the 15% of the parts for the F-35, which is one of the major planes which they're using to pummel Gaza. So it was all show. And in fact, even David Lammy in the Commons apologized profusely for doing it. He said, "I don't do this in anger. I do this in sorrow."
He's the foreign minister.
He's the foreign minister, and he's very pro-Israel, and even though they did this suspension, his reaction was he was basically apologizing profusely to this genocidal government for doing it. And just a bit of context on that, how far the British political system has moved towards Israel is in 1982, there was a total arms embargo on Israel by Margaret Thatcher's government after the invasion of Lebanon. So no arms went. So this is tiny compared. And obviously, Margaret Thatcher was not a politician that I think any of us would have supported or would have thought was more radical on human rights than a Labour government. But anyway, so all this is happening in dark. The other side of it is also 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and MI6, because RAF Akrotiri is one part of these what are called sovereign base areas on Cyprus. There's another sovereign base area in the east of the island called 𝐓𝐿𝐿𝐼, which is a huge intelligence station, which is basically a US National Security Agency station as well. And they have a very, very close relationship with Israel, as we know. And it's very, very likely that intelligence being gathered from Gaza, which sits a 40-hour flight time from these places, is being shared with the Israelis. We don't know anything about that because obviously these are completely secret agencies. And it's not secret to protect us; it's secret to protect themselves from us. And just to finish with the spy platforms.
And Matt, just again to clarify for people who are watching all over the world, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, just tell us briefly what MI6 and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 are, because not everyone will recognize those.
Yeah, so MI6 is the main external intelligence agency of Britain, and it's completely secret. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is the main surveillance intelligence agency, and actually 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is much, much bigger than anything else in Britain. And they have huge amounts of power. They're basically a support team for the UK military. They don't present themselves like that. They present themselves with nice cuddly crosswords in The Guardian at Christmas time and stuff like that. But they are a major part of the British war machine and obviously now the Israeli war machine. And it was revealed actually in the New York Times, which is this wasn't covered in one UK newspaper, but it was revealed in the New York Times recently, a couple of months ago, that Britain has had a spy squadron stationed inside Israel for the whole of the genocide, providing intelligence for them for what they claim is hostage rescue. But again, this is a very important point because everything I've described that has come out, they've always defended it by saying it's all to do with hostage rescue. It's nothing to do with any kind of combat role. But Britain, David Cameron said in January, David Cameron was then Foreign Secretary, he said we have 2 hostages there. And now it's down to 1 because it's likely that the Israelis killed the other one. So you're talking about a 1,000-hour flight time, often 2 flights a day going from RAF Akrotiri over Gaza for 1 hostage. Plus, Israel has, as we know, has full control, surveillance of Gaza. It's unclear what Britain can provide. But what I think it is, these they're R1 shadows, they're called, these aircraft, and they can provide all sorts of reconnaissance information. One is what's called target acquisition. And again, none of this footage is being released. My colleagues did another story recently, which was that there was a plane in the sky, a British plane, just in the sky over Gaza just before the assassination of the 3 British aid workers, which became controversial, but only for a few days. It was kind of,
and that was part of. They were part of the World Central Kitchen team.
Exactly. Yeah, and my colleagues requested the footage that was gathered by these British spy flights, and they were refused. So, as you say, 1,000 hours. That was a couple of months ago as well. It's going to be much more now. This is probably the best information for one of history's worst crimes. So we need to get hold of it, and the ICC need to be demanding that footage, because as I mentioned, like Britain's role is basically a spy and logistics role. It hasn't been the Americans flying these spy flights every day, although they have been sending drones, but we don't know too much about that. In terms of official surveillance. It's the British, and they're refusing to hand it over. There was questions asked in Parliament about will you hand it to the ICC, and they kind of didn't answer. They just said, well, we're not collecting any information that's not to do with hostage rescue, so there'll be nothing to hand to the ICC. But basically, they are complicit, and we need full exposure of what they were doing with that information, full exposure of what this spy squad was doing inside Israel and has been, and how involved in operations it's been. Because my hunch is it's been very involved. And let me just finish with this, because this is a very important part as well, which is the special forces role. As I mentioned, RAF criteria has been central to the international build-up of forces and equipment to get to Israel for its genocide. A major part of that has been special forces. Now, special forces are a completely secret part of the military. They're even more secret than the intelligence world. The SAS was reported by the Sun newspaper on October 27th as being deployed to Cyprus for Gaza operations. Again, for hostage rescue. I don't believe that. On October 28th, the British Ministry of Defence, through its what's called a D-Notice committee, sent out a D-Notice. I'll explain what that is in a minute, but let me just finish. They sent out a D-Notice to every editor of the media and newspapers in Britain, saying, do not publish any more information about British Special Forces and Gaza. And they've acceded to that. We've had no more information. But what were those SAS doing in Cyprus? Were they moved to Israel? And we should come on to this, because there's been tons of cargo flights as well that have gone to Israel from RF.
Sure.
But the SAS, so the SAS are likely in Israel, and I have done work on the SAS before. And what is likely is that they will have an advisory role with the Israeli military about their ground invasion. But it's possible that they could be on the ground in Gaza, or could have been at certain points. There's no reason that's preposterous. And in fact, Jeremy Corbyn did ask a question in Parliament saying, are there any UK personnel on the ground in Gaza? And they refused to answer. So again, we would get to the bottom of this very, very quickly if the media in Britain did its job, but it doesn't. None of this gets into the mainstream media. So it's multifaceted and it's out of the headlines. But I think if there's going to be any justice for the people that have committed this genocide, the British ministers involved and personnel on the ground should be high up the list of people that are targeted for justice by the ICC and the ICJ and any other body that's looking into these crimes.
Matt, can you talk about those cargo shipments, what you know about that, and a little bit more about this 𝐓𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 base and what it's been used for in the past, and whether there's been any precedent for the kinds of intelligence and surveillance and weapons and parts, apparatus coming from the British government in such a secretive way.
Yeah, well, RAF 𝐓𝐿 is a major launch pad for all British wars in the Middle East. They bombed Iraq from there. They bombed Yemen recently from there 3 times, I think, during the recent US-British attacks on Yemen. And I've actually been there. I was there in 2022 for a bunch of stories, one of which is up on the screen. Now, what's interesting about RAF 𝐓𝐿, and it goes to this whole theme of like the empire is really exposed now because they've had to come out of the shadows for the Gaza genocide to really expose themselves. One thing about British bases is that they are basically American bases as well. And this is one of the major services that the British do for the Americans after the imperial handover, after the Second World War. They kept themselves relevant by basically retaining these sites around the world, which includes Falklands, Gibraltar, Cyprus, Bahrain, Nepal. That we have bases everywhere, and they're basically all American bases. And the irony is, you can get information, and I've tried and got information about UK activity on these bases, but you can't get any information about foreign military activities, which is primarily Israeli and US. They basically say a blanket statement of, we do not comment on foreign allies' activity on our bases. So the US we know the US has been moving weapons to Israel via RAF 𝐓𝐿, but the UK government has stonewalled any questions in Parliament from MPs or journalists as well. So there's that, and then so all the information I'm describing is basically being got by us, but through the Ministry of Defence has had to react. So you mentioned the cargo flights. Now, I noticed on flight tracker websites soon after October 7th that Britain was sending basically a cargo flight every day to Israel from RF criteria. And these were all C-17s and A400s, which are huge military transport vehicles. They can carry huge amounts of weapons, including tanks and helicopters, and up to 150 personnel in terms of the C-17. And again, not covered at all by the media. So I asked the Ministry of Defence, I said, how many flights have you sent? I guess this was at the end of October, and they said, we're not going to tell you. But then I independently did it and did a story on it. And reactively, they then said, okay, well, we sent this many. And then it carried on and on and on. And we still don't know what had been on those flights. By June, there was a flurry of it up to about January, and then it kind of settled down a bit. But I did a story in May, and the total was 60. But about 48 of those were in the first 3 months. And they always said, the British said, when they had to defend it, which they haven't because the media's not asked them, when I've asked them, they've always said, well, it's about moving ministers to and from Israel, and it's about moving medical supplies. But you're sort of like, why would you need 48 massive C-17s and A400s just to send medical supplies? So we don't know what were on those. And again, it's about complicity in genocide. They know, I think my hunch is that the British ministers, when they were doing it, they knew that what they were doing was illegal or could make them vulnerable to prosecution, because at one stage, an MP in Britain, who everyone should know, he's not an MP anymore. He lost his seat at the last election, but he's called Kenny McCaskill, and he was an MP for @Alba, which is a sort of splinter off from the SNP. It's a Scottish Nationalist Party. But he led the way in Parliament in trying to prize information, and he asked a parliamentary question, which is a system here where you can any MP can ask government departments for information. He asked a question about RF criteria soon after we started publishing these stories, and they said, we're blocking it. So the British government actually blocked. They didn't even answer the question and say we can't answer because of national security reasons. They said we're not going to answer any questions about RF criteria. So there obviously there's a cover up, and we need to get to the bottom. And can I just mention one more thing? I know I'm rattling on, but there's one more important part of this, which is also about Israeli planes in the UK, because I found I asked how many Israeli planes had landed in the UK after October 7th, military planes, and the Ministry of Defence said we don't comment. And then I independently verified that 6 had landed at various locations and gone on to Nevatim base in Beersheba in Israel, and also into the US, Dover, which is a base where a lot of the weapons for Israel are coming from. Anyway, after that, they, again, same dynamic, they changed course because they realized, okay, we've been got here. So they announced in, I think, February that 9 Israeli military planes had landed. And then a couple of months later, Kenny McCaskill again asked how many Israeli planes have landed. This was after the ICJ investigation had started. And they said they reversed their previous position and said, we're not going to tell you how many Israeli military planes have landed now. So you see again and again, there's a cover-up, a massive cover-up, and it will come out eventually. But my belief is that the cover-up has been ordered by ministers who are scared that because they know they are complicit in a genocide, which is being investigated by the ICJ, and obviously as well the ICC have requested arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant.
Matt, there's so many questions I have for you. I mean, well, I'm just going to ask my questions before I forget them, and then you can take them in any order you want to. But one is, I want to ask you how you do this, because there are flight tracker websites and apps that I like to use. And I know I have the experience sometimes that there's a plane flying overhead. Literally, I can see it. But then I look at the flight tracker app and there's nothing there. It's not on the app. So my question is, how do you track? I mean, without giving away any secrets, how do you track these flights? Why are they making them visible? That's one question. I'm just going to ask the others because I know I'll forget them otherwise. The other is, is there any evidence of, now this base is, as you said, 𝐓𝐿 about 30 minutes flight time from Israel. Is there any evidence of Israel operating out of the base or any indication? And the reason I ask that is because you may remember recently, a few weeks ago, the speech by the Hezbollah leader, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who indicated in a speech that Hezbollah had indications or evidence that Israel was moving aircraft to Cyprus to protect them from potential strikes by Hezbollah, Iran, or anyone else. So was he possibly referring to 𝐓𝐿 or other British and or American controlled bases on Cyprus? And my third question is, well, okay, so we have these British ministers who were afraid that potentially this is your thesis. Of course, you know, all of this is shrouded in mystery, but it's a reasonable hypothesis that they're covering up these activities because they're afraid of being held criminally accountable. But there's recently been a change of government in the UK. When the genocide started, you had a Conservative government. Now you have a Labour government. Can we expect, or is there any change with the change of government in the UK?
Yeah, I'll deal with them. I'll deal with the last one first and go backwards.
I'm sorry
so
again
just
for
on the
throwing
Labour-
all that at you at once.
That's all right. That's all right. I'll try and remember. You can nudge me.
Now
the
I'll
first one on the
remember
Labour
having
government,
said
no.
them. I'll remember them.
Labour government, no, I don't think there's any hope of. In fact, as you guys have done nearly all the important work on the power of the Israeli state over the Labour Party, it's complete, and in fact, in many ways, even more complete than the Conservative Party, I believe. I think that what was happening, again, it goes to the point about the vulnerable to criminal prosecution, because I think that the Labour ministers were told by people in the Foreign Office, look, we've got legal advice that what we're doing is illegal. If you don't do anything, you will be vulnerable to prosecution, because there's no way David Lammy and Keir Starmer wanted to do that. And it was a token gesture as well, as I mentioned. So they're not going to make any change, and they've done nothing to change the much bigger British role, which is the ones I've described. So it's window dressing, and but again, it's quite interesting because the Israel lobby and the Labour Party, they feel like they have such complete control over it. Even that symbolic gesture has put them on the wrong side of them. You know, there was a massive outpouring of attacks from all the usual suspects when they did that, even though it was a token gesture. So it is interesting. And the only reason they did it, as I said, because there was a resignation by a Foreign Office official, the first resignation of a British official, despite the deep complicity, about a month ago. So no, I don't expect any change. And actually, if you look at the spy flights and other parts that I've described, they still happen. They're still going on, and there's the same secrecy. So, and then on your second question was about Israel itself using RAF 𝐓𝐿. Now, that's a very good question. And yes, there is evidence. So about maybe 3 months ago, the Daily Express, which is one of the worst newspapers in the world, they had a briefing from an anonymous British official who said the British have rescinded access for Israeli F-35s to land at 𝐓𝐿. So the imputation was they previously had access. And as I said, that we provide, the UK supplies 15% of the F-35, and they provide aftercare and maintenance for the vehicles. So my hunch is that they were landing at RAF 𝐓𝐿 for that aftercare and maintenance. And we don't know, we have no idea what, another question was put down in Parliament about that. And they said, we refuse to say if Israeli military planes have landed at RAF 𝐓𝐿, as for the reason I said before, because we don't comment on foreign militaries' activities on our bases. But again, we need to know that, because my hunch is the complicity is much, much deeper than we know, and involves direct Israeli planes, because as I mentioned, we allowed them to land in Britain, 9 of them that we know about, and they've stopped divulging how many more. and it's very likely those planes were carrying weapons. So and the UK, my colleague John McAvoy did a story recently that UK airspace has been used to transport. We know this for a fact, to transport huge amounts of weapons to Israel. So yes, I think that the Israelis have definitely been using British bases, and very likely have been using RAF Akrotiri, according to this Daily Express article. But we don't know. And again, sorry to bang on about this, but it's one of my bugbears. If the mainstream media had done anything about it, it would have really put pressure on the government to stop that access. Because after I revealed that about those Israeli military planes in Britain, the Scottish government rescinded access to for the Israeli military to Glasgow Prestwick Airport, which was where an Israeli military jet had landed in November. That was under the SNP government there. So imagine if, and that was done without any mainstream. That was done just from an article on Declassified. If there were articles in the Guardian and the Telegraph really were exposing this complicity, not only would it stop, but there would be pressure to prosecute the ministers responsible, which there should be. And then your first question was, it was related to that.
It was about how
do you get these? How do you get the information? Yes.
Yes.
So it's interesting. So the Israeli military planes in Britain one was hard because the flight tracker website I use, which is called Radarbox, they have the Israeli Air Force is on the blocked list. You can't get any information. But I remember just one day I was messing around, like looking at different ways I could get information about Israeli Air Force movements without actually going through that one portal. And I found a way of doing it. It was basically a heat map where it's, for some reason, they'd put where Israeli military planes were on a heat map and listed some bases. So I looked, and one of them was Glasgow Prestwick. There was another one called RAF Mildenhall, which is a US military base in Britain. And then published. It was an incomplete article because I could only find 6. It was actually 9 that the government divulged after my article. But that was one way of doing it. I mean, the other stuff has been mainly just going down the list and counting how many flights are going, because they do list them, which again, you asked the question of why do they put the information up there, and I do wonder that as well. But it is also incomplete. Even the stuff there, I know I'm not getting the right numbers because it might be way more. There was an article early on in the genocide in 𝐓𝐻𝐻𝐿 which said RAF Akrotiri is the international hub for the international support for Israel's attack on Gaza. And they quoted, this was about a month in, that 40 different US Air Force transport planes had landed there. And that was way more than I could find on Radarbox. And I couldn't work out what the discrepancy was. I don't know how they got that other information. But it's not complete. But it's, as I say, the dynamic is we publish an article which reveals an incomplete sort of picture, and then the government is exposed and they feel they have to release the real figures. But as I say, we don't know one, with the cargo flights, we don't know what was on them, and we need to know. Number two, on the spy flights, we don't know how this information is being used. So we're kind of still scratching the surface, and this is going to be years and years of work, and hopefully will end with prosecution of the ministers involved, because all journalists should not down tools when this horror finishes. We need to, it's our job to make sure everyone who had anything to do with it is held accountable.
Yeah.
Matt, very quickly, what about the people in Cyprus? Who you said there's 3% of the island that has been stolen by the British military for this base. What has been the reaction to all of this by people in Cyprus who are watching this happen, who are watching these transport planes carrying weapons or surveillance equipment or whatever it is inside that is aiding and abetting the genocide in Gaza? What have the people in Cyprus been saying?
Well, it's been huge. You know, I didn't know this before, but there's a huge pro-Palestine movement in Cyprus. And I've been contacted by countless people sending me videos of actions of protests that have been using our work. And they're all saying thank you so much because our media is not covering it. So, there's been some coverage in a paper called the Cyprus Mail, but actually it's quite interesting if you look into the major the sort of papers of record in Cyprus. They're quite aligned with the British military, and in fact one of them actually published a hit piece on Declassified, which was a real hatchet job. It was this is like the paper of record in Cyprus. It was sourced to some anonymous British military official, but it said something along the lines of Declassified UK is known to be aligned with the Labour Party in Britain, which I found very funny actually, because anyone who has spent any time on Declassified or on my Twitter account knows that's quite far from the truth. But there's been a huge outpouring of disgust. And I think it's really been a massive problem. The British ambassador, they had to release a statement. It's a high commissioner actually in Cyprus. They had to release a statement saying we had nothing to do with the genocide in Gaza. The representative in northern Cyprus had to give an interview to a newspaper where he defended what the British were doing. So we've really caused a lot of problems for the British there, which is right, because they should be held accountable for facilitating this genocide in such a direct way and also covering it up. And just to go to the question of how do they feel about the British military and intelligence bases. Now, it was quite interesting. In 1960, Archbishop Makarios, he was like the liberation leader of Cyprus. He was the first president of democratic independent Cyprus. And he was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement. So Cyprus wanted to be non-aligned from the east and the west. But one of the stories I actually did in 2022 when I went there was about, I found top secret declassified documents that showed that the British had secretly turned Cyprus through these areas into a NATO asset and actually housed nuclear capable Vulcan bombers on these sites. So the British have been taking the piss with Cyprus ever since we supposedly left. But they're not super unpopular there because, number one, everyone hates the Turkish occupation much more because Turkey invaded in 1974 and has never left. And the occupation of northern Cyprus is not recognized by any one country in the world apart from Turkey, which has a reason to recognize it. So and also if you go to the border, like the Turkish have put massive Turkish flags all over the hills. So it's clear that there's an occupation. Whereas the really interesting thing about the British zones are, because this 3%, it's not just military bases. There's military bases on them, but you're talking about huge parts of Cyprus, but there's not a single British flag. It's quite interesting. And I was talking to people when I was there. I was like, why is it that I was interviewing people on the sovereign base areas and saying, do you know you're on sovereign British territory here? This is like locals and tourists. And they said, you must be joking. We're in Cyprus. I was like, no, you're on British territory. So the British try and keep it really, really low level, usually, because they don't want to attract the ire that there is for the occupation in the north. But that's been completely blown out of the water by Gaza, because as I say, there's this huge pro-Palestinian movement there, and there's huge disgust that their land is being used as the international hub for facilitating, supporting, and arming this genocide.
Matt, I want to come back to Yemen, because today, according to Yemeni media and non-Western media, British and American warplanes have been bombing Yemen for the third consecutive day. And I was looking for more information on this, and I could find literally no information in Western media, none. It all came from Yemeni media or media in the region. The only sort of Western confirmation, at least of the American role, was a tweet from CENTCOM, the American Central Command, which confirmed American attacks on Yemen. But I could find absolutely nothing related to the British role in these attacks on Yemen, which, according to Yemeni media, yesterday killed 2 people and injured 5 others at a girls' school near Taiz. So talk more about that. Why is there this media silence? Is that you referred earlier to these denotices? Could that have something to do with it, or is it just that nobody in the West cares about Yemen? And then talk more about the British role and the role of these bases in the war against Yemen, which until Gaza has it's a horrible statistic, but until this genocide in Gaza was the world's worst humanitarian catastrophe because of the US-led war on Yemen that started by Barack Obama in 2015. Talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, my sense is it's not denotices or anything, which makes it much, much worse. It's just that our media, and this has been exposed more than I think ever in that I've seen in my lifetime, but probably before by Gaza, is just our media is just operates 99% of the time as just an arm of the state. They report exactly what they're told, or they report exactly what what the government says. So when basically something that's not conducive to the state narrative just doesn't exist. If the British government comes out and advertises the fact it's bombed Yemen, then the media will report it. But if they haven't, I haven't looked into it because I've been away in the last couple of days. But that will be why. Denotices generally are about special forces and intelligence. In fact, we got sent one once, and they told us to censor one of our articles about Paul Biya, who's the oldest dictator in Africa. He's the dictator of Cameroon, and we did a whole investigation, my colleague Phil Miller, about British support for him, and they contacted us and told us to censor something, and we told them no. But Yemen, yeah. So Yemen is again a British crime. Not only the destruction and bombing that you've seen recently because of its solidarity with the Palestinians, but before that, in the war that started in 2015 that you mentioned, the British role was huge, and may even have been bigger than the United States. We armed I think 60% of our arms go to Saudi Arabia. The Saudi dictatorship particularly is a British thing. You know, we helped install them in the 1930s, and we have since the 60s had 12 troops embedded in what's called the White Army, which is like the personal protection force of the Saud dictatorship. So and again, none of it was reported. In fact, before Gaza, nearly all the work we did, a large portion of the work we did at Declassified was about the British role in Yemen, and none of it was reported in the mainstream media. And in fact, there was a very brave UK soldier that protested outside the Ministry of Defence, I think probably like 4 years ago. And he had this thing where he rang a bell to every minute to signify how many Yemenis were dying because of the British war. And he was arrested by military police outside the Ministry of Defence in London, discharged. His protest and his action was barely covered by the British media. Then we interviewed him at Declassified UK. And he said, actually, I learned about the British role in Yemen from Declassified UK. Now, it's absurd. At that point, it was 3 of us. It's absurd that we are complicit in, as you say, the worst at the time, which was the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. 2.3 million kids on the brink of starvation. Just the Saudi military bombing schools, hospitals, prisons, everything. It was completely barbaric. And yet no one was covering what was going on. It got to, and it was direct. You know, we had 5. I don't know if they're still there, but during the air campaign by Saudi Arabia, we had 5 UK military officials inside the Saudi Air Operations Center, who would have seen every single war crime that was committed by the Saudis. There's never been that's not even been mentioned in the media, let alone interviewing maybe some of the people who saw this stuff. So British complicity is deep, and it is quite interesting because as you mentioned at the start, my books before Declassified UK were always focused on the United States because it's the most powerful country in the world. What it does has this huge impact. I'd always thought Britain was a bit of a bit player that doesn't have a big, but we're deeply involved in all the worst stuff that's happening around the world, and we get away with it because people think we're not a big player anymore. But our effect criteria is a sign that we are, and also we're willing to do things that other countries aren't because we want to prove ourselves that we still have the sort of imperial muscle. Why the United States doesn't need us to help them bomb Yemen, does it? It doesn't need us, but it's to show, okay, we're an alliance. The Israelis don't need us to fly R1 Shadows over Gaza. This is one of the most sophisticated militaries in history. Why do they need British to fly? It's just so we're used as a kind of cover to create the sense that there's coalitions for these terrorist regimes, and as shown by the Gaza genocide better than ever, the British establishment have absolutely no scruples about massacring thousands of people, thousands of kids, about their client, one of their closest allies, withdrawing all food, water, and electricity. So it's a really ugly story, the British, and it goes back to the empire. You know, there's this whole idea that the empire died after the Second World War. Firstly, it didn't; it just repackaged itself. And secondly, the mentality that gave the British establishment, which is fostered in all the private schools in Britain, like Eton and Harrow and others, that mentality is still deep within the British establishment. And what it is a deeply racist, deeply colonial mentality that actually doesn't see people like Palestinians as human beings. That is the bottom line of it all. And that runs deep in British society. And I actually think Britain's maybe one of the worst countries in the world for that, and that's shown by the fact we've had no whistleblowers. Still, 11 months in, there's so many different agencies that are involved in this genocide from the British side, and we've had no whistleblowers. In the United States, there's been quite a few, and there's been a steady stream of people resigning from, and I think that's because the deference to authority, the deference to this imperial program is much, much deeper in Britain and goes much, much further back historically.
Yeah, it's and meanwhile, the British government is also waging this incredible war of repression against activists, journalists like yourself and your colleagues. Of course, we spoke a little bit last week. Asa brought up the story of Sarah Wilkinson, an activist who was arrested with a swarm of police. They, as part of her bail conditions, which were eventually reversed, she wasn't allowed to use a phone or any digital device. And this is just for posting on Twitter. And this is happening to multiple journalists and activists around the UK. Can you talk about the atmosphere of repression by the British government for of people who are trying to hold the government accountable and expose the kinds of war crimes that the government is involved in?
Yeah, well, I'll start by this. That this isn't new in Britain. We don't have a culture of adherence to free speech or free press that I think you kind of do in the States. Obviously, I'm not praising the mainstream media in the US, but there's a different culture. Denotice committee is one example, right? If I talk to American journalist friends, it's like, even the establishment ones, they're like, what you have this relationship with the intelligence and military in a formal way where they tell you what you can and can't publish. Like, we do it, but it's behind closed doors. It's a bit embarrassing. But the UK, the Denotice committee is seen as fine, and that tells you what you need to know. And in terms of us, a year into founding Declassified UK, because of our work on Yemen, we were blacklisted by the Ministry of Defence. And it became a big problem for them because the Council of Europe issued a level 2 media alert, which meant that the military had to respond. And eventually they had to appoint an independent inquiry in Parliament, which resulted in a very, very shocking report about what was happening internally and why they blacklisted us. And then the Defence Secretary at the time, Ben Wallace, had to get up in Parliament and apologise to us. He said, we apologise to Declassified UK. So that's the history. Our government has never believed in free press, or although they use it as a soft power, a way to project power around the world, they never believed it internally. Another example is Julian Assange, right? But this latest attack on Gaza, journalists and activists involved in anti-genocide politics here. Well, I'm not in England at the moment, but in England, is shocking. Especially, it's not just Sarah Wilkinson. What they did to Sarah Wilkinson is absolutely outrageous. Now, she is like a very prominent journalist and activist, just posting regular updates on what's happening in Gaza and exposing the complicity of her government. And they've raided her house, 13 police officers, some in balaclavas, and like tipped over the urn with her mum's ashes on, which she had to like get off the wall, bundled her into a van, and then released her with these bail conditions where she couldn't use a phone or even touch a phone. And that came a week after Richard Medhurst, who's another independent journalist, was stopped at Heathrow and detained under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, which is a hugely serious thing. It carries up to 14 years in prison if you're convicted. And he was held in solitary confinement for basically 20 hours, given a 1-hour interview. And they didn't need to do it like this, but what they wanted to do was to send a sign that it is not tolerated to speak out for Palestinians in Britain anymore, because they have lost control of the narrative in Britain. It's important to get this across. Zionism is dying in Britain because people have seen too much. They've had 11 months of watching this horror, and they do not believe all the lies. They're not playing the game that the Zionist lobby wants them to play anymore. And the establishment, which is in lockstep with the Israelis, is scared by that. And in fact, I think being guided in some senses by the Israel lobby, because the other thing is who were reporting these people to police. There was after Sarah Wilkinson was arrested, there was a tweet sent by this account called Nasher Jew, which is a account which just tries to smear anyone who is pro-Palestinian as an anti-Semite. And they tweeted something along the lines of, "At last, the police have taken up our repeated references to Sarah Wilkinson's extremism, blah, blah, blah." So that's a sign that there's Zionist groups, and this is a hunch, a reasonable speculation, are reporting people, are trawling the internet and reporting people who are saying things that they want to use to get them arrested. So and Starmer, it has happened. It's ramped up under Starmer, which is not surprising if you look at his history, because he was head of the CPS. He was senior public prosecutor in Britain from 2008 to 2013, and he has an awful record in that regard. During the 2011 riots in Britain, he put people away for like years for stealing a bottle of water in Tottenham and other places. So it's actually a scary environment. And I'm doing this interview on my phone because I didn't want to. I'm going to Germany for a story, and I didn't want to take my laptop because I don't know what's going to happen on the way back in. They want to send a message that you cannot do journalism, you cannot expose us on Gaza. And no one, I mean, everyone, it should make everyone double down and go harder, but and it's not going to work. But that is the message they want to send, and that was also the message they want to send by putting Julian Assange in Belmarsh. I'll just finish with this. I've never not taken my laptop on a reporting trip, and I've been to Myanmar, I've been to Palestine, I've been to plenty of other places. I never even thought about it. This is the first time I've thought, I don't want the police to take my computer, and I didn't even bring a dictaphone. So it is scary. But then, not to sound corny, but when you compare it to what the people in Palestine are going through, it's nothing. So it's that there is a sense, I think it's probably all of us feel like that there's a bravery you get from watching their resilience and watching like you were talking about, the educational, the schools that are doing the buying a bag for their kids. Like these are amazing people that are resisting some of the darkest forces in history. And we have a degree of freedom. It's receding, but we do have a degree of freedom. So if we're not using that to expose our complicity in this horror, then we're not doing our job right, and we're not being moral individuals. So it's not a difficult choice to take, and it's not yet at a stage where people are being put away for years on end. Although, if I was Sarah Wilkinson or Richard Medhurst, I would be worried, because anyone should be worried if they're charged under an act that carries 14 years in prison. Because we saw with Julian Assange in Britain that they do not care about how they appear publicly. They do not care that that there's this example. There's this man sitting in Belmarsh maximum security prison for exposing war crimes. They did it, and most of the way they got away with it is because the media never covered it and they never problematized it. I'm serious. When he was in Belmarsh, I talked to people that don't know about politics or aren't that interested, and they'd be like, "What? He's still there?" Like, the media allowed it to happen, that we had a political prisoner and a journalist, and no one knew about it. And I'll finish with this. That's happened with Richard Medhurst and Sarah Wilkinson. They were arrested maybe a fortnight and 3 weeks ago. This is really, really serious, unprecedented. The Guardian has not published a single word about their arrests. The Guardian has not, obviously the rest of the media has.
And of course, without going, deep into those details, the Guardian played a very nefarious role in the political imprisonment of Julian Assange, and also printed a lot of lies during his imprisonment and mocked him during his imprisonment. Yeah. So it's not just that they're silent; they're sometimes actively egging it on, and it's extraordinary to me to hear that you felt you couldn't bring your laptop because of the risk that that Keir Starmer's police will detain you when you re-enter the UK and demand perhaps that you hand it over or give them whatever information. But the one thing I sort of smiled when you were talking, I said, well, at least you're allowed into Germany, because I actually got banned from Germany.
Yeah, well,
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah, I'm obviously doing something wrong that they let me in, but and as you say, the Guardian, they were a major part of the information war against Julian Assange. That is a whole different story, but it does relate to Gaza as well, because a lot of the stories I've been doing on 𝐓𝐻𝐿 have been referencing the WikiLeaks cables, because, as I say, these are hugely secretive installations, and the only way we got information. So, for example, one of the cables, US cables, included a British letter from an official saying the US is now flying routine spy flights from 𝐓𝐻𝐿, and they were worried about, and that information is being passed to third-party governments, likely Israel. I did a whole story about it if anyone wants to look it up. But the attack on Assange is the same as the attack on the Gaza journalists, and it's the same on, and it all goes to Gaza as well, because they do not want they don't want the imperial system to be exposed, because Israel is a small country, it's 9 million people, about the same population as London. It's got a GDP smaller than Sweden. It couldn't survive for a week without the support of the Anglo-American Empire, particularly the Americans. And that's what they want to obscure. And that's how they always do these, like, oh, we don't know. Yeah, that was bad. It was nothing to do with us. They are complicit, deeply complicit, and actually participants, because they make it possible. And Julian Assange exposed all that. He exposed the system, but he also exposed the British establishment and the British justice system. But I'll have to come back on another time to talk about all that.
Yeah. We absolutely will have to have you back. And just before we let you go, Matt, I want to say that, yes, we can't compare, none of us who are sitting here can compare ourselves to the situation of anyone in Gaza, especially journalists who are targeted and murdered systematically. At the same time, our friends, our loved ones, our colleagues in Gaza tell us how important it is that we continue speaking out. And so no matter what repression we face, we have to continue doing it, and we certainly will. And the work you're doing is absolutely essential. And just from talking to you, I've learned so much. And so we would love to have you back again soon. And I'm just going to remind people before we let you go that you are the co-founder and head of investigations at Declassified UK, which is an absolutely essential independent publication. So I really recommend that people go to Declassified UK. They can follow you on social media, on Twitter. You are at Matt Kennard, is that it?
Kennard Matt.
Kennard Matt. But certainly they should look for Declassified UK. You're also the author of some really important books, including Irregular Army, Silent Coup, and The Racket. And we're very, very grateful for your time today. Good luck with your reporting mission in Germany, and we wish you a safe return to Keir Starmer's Britain.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll say as well that I've been admiring Electronic Intifada's work for many years, but particularly since the genocide started. I think you guys you're the most important English language outlet in the world at the moment. So keep going, and you've got amazing contributors. Particularly someone I've started following recently that's brilliant is who you mentioned. His dad made that artwork for you, Abu Bakr. Incredible. Yes. Yeah, he's so inspirational. You know, he tweeted the other day his quote that he said to you guys, I think, about, look, if I can smile, you can at least smile. I was like, yeah, okay, that's true. If he's teaching us that, then we should listen. But thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt.
So much,
we'll
Matt.
see you again soon.
Thanks for all you do. Oh, that was spectacular. Yeah. That's so much information.
Yeah, and you know, there is so much information that we're all trying to stay on top of, but in preparing for that conversation, and credit to Aqsa, who helped us to prepare for that discussion so that we were well informed. But I spent much of the morning reading a lot of these articles, and I learned so much. So, you know, no matter how much you know, you realize there's so much you don't know. But I think the key takeaway for me was that Britain may look like a little tin pot former colonial power, a rainy little island off the tip of far West Asia, but it plays a far bigger nefarious role than you might realize. That's what I really got from reading all of that incredible work at Declassified.
Yeah, continues to be a junior partner of the U.S. Yeah, and there's so much more that I want to learn about, especially about Cyprus and the airbase there. I mean, I couldn't help but think about Guantanamo and the U.S.'s ongoing occupation.
Yeah, it's exactly what it's like. I was looking at the Google map of the British sovereign area while we were speaking, actually, and it's like it's huge. It's much bigger than I imagined. It's you know, and it's just these things you don't realize. And Britain has these little, you know, tiny little colonial possessions all over the world, which are bases for the US, for the so-called Five Eyes, you know, the Anglo-Saxon alliance of axis of evil, let's call them, the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So yeah, a lot more to learn.
Well, great. And we'll definitely have him back. Well, thanks, Ali. Thank you again to Matt Kennard at Declassified UK. Let's go for the resistance report now. Let's bring on John. Hey, John.
Hey, yeah, I agree. Great interview.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
So a lot happened this week. You've been tracking, of course, both what's happening in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank. There were a lot of drone strikes on northern historic occupied Palestine by Hezbollah. It was a busy week, so
let's get right into it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, guys. I just wanted to say before I started, if you joined us late, that we have been taken down from YouTube and given a 1-week penalty where we can't post because of videos that I've made. And I just wanted to reiterate, if you're joining us and didn't see the start of the show, that we put considerable, extraordinary levels of care into making these videos broadcast able. We edit out any violence that is directed towards humans. There's no injuries or deaths in our videos. We take editorial standards to make sure that that's not the case. We know that we're targets. We've taken on this work. All of us are veterans of this work, and we've been targeted since the beginning. Palestine is subjected, as everybody watching this show knows, to extraordinary levels of censorship. And that's the foundation upon which we then do our editing of the videos to remove any kind of content that would be outside the boundaries of journalistic and broadcast standards. So I just want to reiterate that again, because it's something that I think everybody that watches this show knows. And I see it in the comments when people are saying, why can't we see the full videos? This is why you can't see the full videos. And we made a decision to edit the videos in such a way that in many cases, you lose a significant portion of what the video is. But we make that decision in order for the whole to remain up. And we do that because we believe that this moment is a historic moment. And clocking forensically, as CNN told us we get to call it, our forensic coverage of the resistance during a genocide is a historic moment and a historic responsibility that we take very, very seriously. So this is a very angering, maybe expected censorship that is really disrupts the ability of people to get this information. And we found out just before we went on the air. So we don't have a structured program of response yet in hand, but stay tuned and we will try to come up with some sort of way for people to participate in pushing back against this, because it's clearly just blatant censorship. So just wanted to say that off the top. So and thanks to Tamara for these last 11 months going through the videos with me. We go over them, I edit them, she edits them. We look together at them to make sure that they don't have any weaknesses in them. So thanks as ever to Tamara for doing that work over these months. So having said that, hi Tamara, can we go to map A? We're going to look at the full Gaza Strip today, because normally for the last 130 days or so, we've been covering starting the resistance report in Rafah and moving north, because the main battle space has been in Rafah. But this week there wasn't fighting in Rafah. It was the Israelis have withdrawn into the corridors, the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian border, where they're working on the commercial tunnels that were built to circumvent the blockade. They're commercial tunnels. They're not military weapons smuggling tunnels that they're digging up right now on the Egyptian border. But this week, the past 2 weeks, actually, I mentioned it on the show last week, they're not operating inside the cities of Rafah, inside the camps and cities in Rafah. They're only on the border with Egypt, and they're not pressing their offensive into Rafah. The 98th Division, which I've mentioned every week on this show, because they're the division that has moved around. They're the raider unit for this corridor and raid strategy that Israel took up in the early new year, where you solidify your position in these corridors and you use those corridors to then raid territories that you want to attack, territories that we were told were under operational control by the Israelis in November and December. And faithful listeners to our show know that that's been a joke the whole time. It's not the case. But when the 98th Division, who went into they were the ones who carried out the massacre at Shifa Hospital, They went from there to the Jabalia camp and carried out a number of massacres in the Jabalia camp before fighting with 𝐬𝐿 heavily in the Jabalia camp, which had been previously said that Hamas had been dismantled in the Jabalia camp. Israel reinvaded it they said that in November. Israel reinvaded it in July and got immediately smoked by 30 operations a day, qualitative operations. They captured a soldier in the tunnels that they had lured into the tunnels with an intelligence operation. So this idea that you're going to hear that Hamas has been dismantled as a military force, that the 𝐬𝐿 brigades is not functioning as a military force, is a lie. It's not true, and it's not the reason why the fighting is this past week less than we've seen in. It's less than we've seen in months. The field reports are down, and this is a battle of attrition. It's a battle of attrition for the Israelis as well, and that's why the 98th Division was pulled out, is to rest and repair their gear. And so for the fighters, the defensive fighters fighting in the Gaza Strip, they're not going to chase the Israeli forces around. They stay in their combat positions. They're in their combat positions in Rafah, Khan Yunis, the middle camps, all over Gaza City. They're also in the north. And if and when Israel reinvades those territories, you're going to see qualitative military operations that are organized by 𝐬𝐿's military force that is still intact. The war is costly. There's no question about that. The war is costly on Palestinian civilians primarily. Of course, that's the main target of Israel, but it's costly on the fighters. It's costly on Israeli fighters and materiel, and as we've seen, of their social cohesion. And so declaring this battle is somehow over because 𝐿𝐿 𝐄𝐿, the defense minister, gives a press conference where he says that Hamas is not functioning as a military force. We know, and this audience knows, to disregard that. So we're going to actually focus this week, and just to say, that's battle space, because Israel says where they're invading. They give evacuation notices. The civilians leave, and the fighters come into the area and fight. And so that's battle space. But what Nora covers at the top of every show is the war that goes on outside of the battle spaces. That's a war against civilians. It's a war on the Mawasi tent camps. It's on the schools that should be in class but are not. That is constant. 50 airstrikes a day is steady, basically every day, sometimes 35, 40, basically 50 a day. And that doesn't include artillery. And artillery is a major weapon that is used by the Israelis because you can fire it from their guns on the other side of the border where they're relatively safe. So they sit back there like cowards and rain down these high explosive shells onto the civilian population. And that's why every single day we see 50, 70 people killed every day. And they're not killed on the battlefield. They're being massacred by Israel. And that massacre, that pressure is not changing Israel's ceasefire demands. It's not allowing the demands of Israel to be raised. Hamas has been very clear on that. The changes in the demands are not changing because you're massacring civilians as they did. And just once again, shout out to Nora for doing that newscast. I believe it's the hardest newscast in the world because it's the only one that actually understands what's happening on the ground and knows what stories to tell. And those stories are just devastating. And I know some people have to turn off the show and regroup after that. And that's why it's really appalling that this resistance report stuff is being censored, because we're living in a historic moment of brutality and the heroic resistance that has happened under those conditions. For that to be erased, all wholesale erased, is outrageous. So just wanted to say that as an introduction. Let's zoom in on the Netzarim corridor tomorrow. Yeah. So you can see what's happening on the corridor. They have been pressing the corridor wider after the operations that we saw that the new recruits took, where they infiltrated behind enemy lines into the Netzarim corridor and hit the Israelis hard with an operation some weeks ago. And so the Israelis have been blowing up areas of Zaytun and Tel El-Hawa to move the corridor wider so that their forces are safer inside that corridor. So that's the thrust of the operations this week. And just this morning, I'll say a medevac helicopter crashed, according to the IDF. 2 killed, 8 wounded. It was a medevac helicopter from Unit 669, which is what we've been covering for the whole war. And the fighters just watched them fly away well within target range. Not clear if it was the first time we've seen a medevac helicopter shot down. The Israelis say it wasn't, and no reports from the resistance yet. But as I said, this just happened overnight before the show. So I'm going to put this off till next week, and we'll do a proper dive into that next week. But just to acknowledge something happened to a medevac helicopter that the Israelis admitted have medevaced more than 1,800 soldiers out of Gaza. And that's the second helicopter that has crashed in this war that began on October 7th, because the fighters, the Nukba force from the Qassam brigades, took down a helicopter in a kibbutz on October 7th. That was the first helicopter. So we'll follow that. Of course, I just wanted to bring that up because, as everybody knows, I've been following that all this war because it seems very clear that the resistance is showing us that they can reach those helicopters and are not doing it, although they haven't spoken about not doing it. So we follow it. We follow it from our own analysis. So yeah, we are going to focus on the Netzarim corridor and the operations this week along the Netzarim corridor. Started off with number 1 here. We have 2 long-range sniper operations that were a joint operation between Saraya al-Quds, Islamic Jihad, and Qassam. Presumably, we have a Al-Ghul. We know we have an Al-Ghul. We see it right there. A joint operation likely means we have a Saraya shooter of a Qassam weapon. Maybe it means Qassam spotter. Maybe it means Saraya spotter. In any case, they hit him, and they clearly hit him there. This is on the edge of the Netzarim corridor in Zaytun. This is from a week ago. Tuesday or Wednesday. It missed the deadline for last week's show. But yeah, this is the first soldier, and they're going to identify the second soldier. You can see them scurrying in front of the window there, dealing with their wounded comrade, the Israeli military. Here's the second sniper. I did a rough calculation of this one, and this one looks to be about a 900-meter sniper distance. So we've seen them go up as much as 1.5 kilometers, and that's one of the reasons the Israelis widened these borders, because of this weapon, this Al-Ghul weapon that is. And this part, the spotter in the background is saying on this scene that this was a successful operation, and you can see here the vehicles moving. So they're showing you the vehicles that are moving to do the medevac of those wounded soldiers. So that's in the Netzarim corridor. And again, it's just the theme on this show is going to be these joint operations as we watch it a second time, because there's communication between the 2 fighters, right? The first fighter says, the spotter is identifying the target and saying to him, be patient, be careful. They're communicating, fluently communicating between the shooter and the spotter, which is something we've been talking about this entire war. And that's why they're getting, in part, they're obviously well trained, but their communication and the way the sniper unit is working together is what's making these successful operations, which are just repeatedly hitting these soldiers. I don't think they would show us videos where the bullet flies over the soldier's head or misses. but their hit rate is extremely high, and they're hitting them with a round that is, the Israelis might call them lightly wounded, but you probably see them having funerals for these operations. Again, this is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 corridor in Zaytun, so they're pushing into that neighborhood, trying to get just another row of houses, another block, and they just destroy everything in the whole area. I try to bring you guys satellite images to show this stuff. I did it last week, but we can go to number 2 tomorrow. I just wanted to bring this one in. It's a quick one from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 Islamic Jihad here. Again, they're monitoring Israeli positions in the corridor. Israel has 3 military positions in the corridor, but this is just interesting to note here. He's slipping here a mortar bomb into his mortar. That's a homemade that's a Gaza-made mortar that you're seeing being fired there. Here comes another Gaza-made mortar that you're going to see fired there. And so each of the unexploded, 55,000 airstrikes plus 5% dud rate at least. There's thousands of 2,000-pound bombs that have 950 pounds of TNT inside them. That TNT is removed and it makes these mortar shells. That's what you're seeing be made. They'll be making a generation worth of mortar shells versus of Yasin warheads for the tandem charge 105s, for the Shawad explosively formed penetrator. They're all using the same powder from inside the bomb that's being dropped on their people. And the bomb doesn't go off, and they repurpose them and send them back, return to sender, as we've seen many times. And then this is number 3. This is a PFLP rocket artillery, 107 millimeter rocket artillery. This is standard rocket artillery. And this one's interesting. I wanted to bring this one into you because the fighters have been all through the war talking about their history, their fighters. And in this one, he says, "O flower of flames in the night of the Galilee, either Palestine or hell, generation after generation," he says, "the brigades of the eternal Abu Ali Mustafa are still deployed in various military positions in their rocket units, artillery units, and engineering units. As the martyr commander Guevara of Gaza told us, this soil will explode under the feet of the Zionists. We say to our people that the covenant is the covenant and the oath is the oath. We will continue on this path and we will not abandon our weapons." So that's an allusion to the Guevara of Gaza. Guevara of Gaza was a PFLP commander who came to prominence after the Israeli occupation of Gaza after the 1967 war. He was inspired by a visit to Gaza by Che Guevara, who came in his military fatigues in 1959. You can read about that. It's a pretty interesting story. Obviously something that Che Guevara did, being a revolutionary diplomat in a way, or a revolutionary commander who went around, and it's not surprising that he would have visited Gaza, but he influenced Mohammed al-Aswad, who is the first general of Gaza. They call him the first general of Gaza. Ariel Sharon and Moshe Dayan were obsessed with him, with finding him. He carried out dozens of operations, more than 20 political assassinations of collaborators, of Israeli municipal officials at that time. That's how the occupation was run. Shabak officers and Israeli military and police officers. And so he was hunted for 5 years. And just to pull the history full circle, he was found in a tunnel he made his last stand battle in a tunnel under a house in the Ramal area of Gaza City. And so you have the PFLP here, Abu Ali Mustafa brigades. You can see their logo there. I talked about him last week on the show. He was assassinated. The anniversary of his assassination was last week. But you just have fighters just, screwing in their 107 millimeter rocket artillery, telling you the story that they're inspired by someone killed in 1973, that they're following in his footsteps, that's who they're saluting. We see all the different factions doing this, saluting their leaders. And it's not all, they salute each other's leaders as well. And we're going to see that more on this show as well, of these kind of communications in the field between the fighters during this genocide. So rocket artillery, again, on the Netzarim corridor, where the Israelis have bases all along the border. So they're firing on these, and they have been firing on the Netzarim corridor since November. So their calibrations of their fire are, at this point, very sharp. And so they are hitting in many cases with these rounds. And number 4 is the Saraya al-Quds. These are joint operations. Again, this is one way that they show their respect for each other is they carry out these. This is the same weapon that Saraya al-Quds was just the Abu Ali Mustafa brigades were shooting. And this is a joint operation, Saraya al-Quds and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades, the Fatah offshoot of fighters. And there's a whole series of them here. So there's a one with the DFLP, the National Resistance Brigades, Martyr Omar al-Qasim forces. There's a second one with the DFLP's forces along with the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades. There's a fourth one that is Saraya al-Quds with the Martyr Abdul Qadir al-Husseini brigades, which is another splinter group within the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades umbrella, you could say. And then Popular Resistance Committee operation, the Nasser Salahuddin brigades, along with the Al-Aqsa Martyrs brigades. And then the sixth one is Saraya al-Quds with the Popular Resistance Committee, Nasser Salahuddin brigades. And these were at Beri and Nahal Oz. Nahal Oz is a base that was wiped out on October 7th. The Israelis this week gave their totals. 78 Golani troops were killed at the side-by-side bases in Kisifim and Nahal Oz. And Nahal Oz is named Nahal Oz as a short form for Nahal Soldiers Across from Gaza. Just in case you wondered if the envelope is as blunt as that, it is. Nahal Oz means Nahal Soldiers Positioned Across from Gaza. And when Moshe Dayan, the influential defense minister, and commander in the IDF, he went to Nahal Oz and said that Nahal Oz is the heavy weight of Gaza on their shoulders. So October 7th, and yeah, I've mentioned it before that Yoav Gallant is named after the operation to clear the Gaza envelope and to turn it into civilian military positions, human shields. And October 7th, that's what they got hit by. Nahal Oz, Shujaiya Battalion, Shujaiya Brigade went across the border and destroyed the Nahal Oz base, dismantled the IDF's Gaza division on that day. And that's in part what we're seeing here is Israel's attempt to get their Israel believes that they can get what was dismantled on October 7th by this genocide. And they believe that their defeat on October 7th has given them the latitude to carry out this genocide. And as I covered last week about Netanyahu's speech, he believes this is a one time in a generation that they're going to get a chance to carry out a genocide like this, with the world, roughly supporting what they're doing. And it seems to be working. The international community has been shown to be a joke. But these operations are still continuing. So when you hear that Hamas is not a fighting force anymore, it's ridiculous. We just watched eight different factions fighting in one set of videos. Plus, we saw the PFLP before that. And then this one is an interesting one that I wanted to bring to you. Number 5 here is an Israeli force in Rafah, in Tel Sultan. They never show fighters, right? They never show fighters. But here they are getting a grenade thrown at them and detonated and wounded one of them. So that's IDF footage. We don't usually show that. But the reason we don't show it is because all their footage is just dumping ammo clips out the window into civilian territory randomly and blowing up stuff on TikTok. And, the TikTok videos are shocking, but the IDF official videos, they're not a whole lot better. They don't show any battle scenes. They don't show any heroism. They just dump their ammunition out the window and say, like, film me. So brought you that one from Gaza. So that's the resistance report from Gaza for this week. I'm going to move to the West Bank and give you just a little update on the West Bank briefly. We're going to show Maxwell's maps here. Maps showing the West Bank. The West Bank map is, it's a very, to do a political map of the West Bank probably is necessary to see the way the territory is divided up. Right there looks like it's a full contiguous piece of territory, but as we know, it's not. It's cut all into little islands, and so, but for the simplicity of just seeing the directions that we're going, we're going to move up to the north. There you can see the north, the Triangle of Terror, the British used to call it, because back in the 1930s, this was the well, for all along, even World War I, going back to World War I, the resistance in Jenin was the anchor. But when the Great Arab Revolt came around in 1936, the year before, Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam was killed with his Black Hand fighters in the hills around Jenin, and his name is the namesake for the resistance movements. Actually, at some point, all of the main resistance factions called themselves the Qassam Brigades. They had to tidy that up during the First Intifada, and groups changed their names, and the Qassam Brigades stuck with theirs. But the PFLP used Qassam Brigades in operations at times. He's the leader of the armed struggle, the birth of the armed struggle, the struggle for liberation as an armed struggle for Palestinians. So that's why they use those names. And just to say about the West Bank's different than Gaza. Gaza is on its own. It's in a ghetto, but it was able to build up its national resistance capabilities because it was autonomous. It had its own space to do that. The West Bank doesn't have that. The West Bank has 365 days a year, 24/7, arrest raids, death squads. They do it from grade 3. They'll go into your grade 3, grade 4 classroom and arrest people. And then they'll say whose brother is a fighter, who's throwing stones. Literally, that's what they do. And they go in, they get intelligence based on that, based on pulling a kid out of class, interrogating him without his family or without a lawyer. And it's just a daily grind. And so the fighters are at constant risk every day. And the ability to build up your force is really, it's curtailed. And that's what Israel attempted. That's what they wanted. And that's what happened back in the Second Intifada in the year 2002. In the heart of the Second Intifada, Israel carried out an Operation Defensive Shield, where they moved into Palestinian Area A, areas that are supposed to be under Palestinian control, which all of these villages that you're looking at here, Tubas, Tulkarm, Nablus, Jenin, and Qalqilia, they invaded all of those, and they never left. And so the ability for the West Bank factions to build up their military capabilities is curtailed in a very strong way. And that's why you see such a difference in the fighting in Gaza versus the fighting in the West Bank. And I think that's probably known to most of our audience, but it's more of a policing, if you can, military policing, because they come in at any time. They're just coming to arrest one person, and they don't even really try that hard to arrest them. They'll just kill them. As Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, said the other day, he referred to it as they're mowing the lawn. But he said the terror organizations that call themselves by all kinds of names in Nur Shams, in Tulkarm, or in the Al-Farah camp in Jenin, these groups will be wiped out. Every single terrorist will be eliminated. So that's how Israel feels about this. And they carry it out on a day-by-day basis. They have what is in military terms called freedom of movement in the West Bank, facilitated by the Palestinian Authority security forces. And so that's what we saw this week. The past 10 days, the 10-day battle horror of the camps ended on Friday in Jenin, but as Nora rightly noted, it didn't end in Tulkarm, it didn't end in Tubas. So let's look at number 10. This is a close quarters battle here by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in the alleyways, the famous alleyways of these Palestinian camps. This is Al-Farah camp in Tubas, and you can see they get the red triangle on the bulldozer, clearly hits the bulldozer. And there's a number of these, dozens at the end. I'll tell you the numbers. But there's a second one. There's the number of these IEDs are high. What isn't high is cameramen able to film the video in the way that we see in the West Bank. And I think, as Nora reported in her story, a 14-year-old girl who looked out the window of her house in Jenin was shot in the head for looking out the window. So your cameraman is in a different position than in the Gaza Strip. So they'll just murder you for looking out the window, and it makes it hard to capture these videos, which is why they're not the cinematic excellence that we get out of Gaza, but they're important to show that they're happening all the time. And these are filmed by locals, probably more so, and then given to the fighters, because they're not telling anyone where these operations are taking place. This is firing at night. And again, we take the audio out of these videos as part of the attempt to stay online. Let's look at number 10. 10B. 10B here. There's a couple of Mujahideen brigades operations in Jenin that had good viewing of them. You can see the bulldozer rolling right over it and getting hit. They keep saying none of these people are injured. They said one bulldozer driver was killed and 6 wounded in the 10-day battle of the horror of the camps battle. So that's in Jenin. And Jenin and Tubas admitted to losing their commander. They lost their battalion commander in Tubas. In Tulkarm, we know they lost their brigade commander, Mohammed Jaber Abu Shuja from Nur Shams. He was the brigade commander in Tulkarm. And we know in Jenin that they lost Surah al-Quds Jenin commander, battalion commander was lost, as well as the Qassam Brigade battalion commander in Jenin lost. So they targeted, they were targeted, and the fighters fought last stand battles, and many of them died. This operation, this 10-day battle, horror of the camps battle, it was costly. It's costly when you lose 12 to 15 fighters in your camp. It's devastating. And so there's going to be a period of regrouping in the West Bank. I think coming from this, losing senior leadership. We're talking about senior leadership. We're talking about 25-year-olds. The other two that I mentioned, the Tubas commander, he's 23. He's 23 years old. And you usually have to assume a few years in prison. So you're talking about guys that would be, if you include their prison terms, they're essentially the same as graduating from high school. You don't have bearded 45-year-old commanders who lived through the Second Intifada and know how to carry out these operations with institutional knowledge that carries along with them. And that is a devastating part of the constant attack, 365 days a year going on in the West Bank. So just to understand, we haven't had much time to talk about the West Bank, so I want to just bring in some of these analysis points to contextualize what we're seeing and why it is different than what we see in Gaza. So in number 11, this is in Tulkarm. This was a Qassam Brigade's engineering unit with a great camera shot of a D9 bulldozer punitively destroying Jenin, as we saw, basically all the roads. They said 80% of the roads, but it's hard to even know what 80% would mean because roads all connect to each other. So it's just punitive. It's It's to punish people for supporting the resistance. And if people saw immediately when the army left, people came out of their house immediately. First of all, they started cleaning everything up. But the second thing they did was they started speaking to the media. And when they spoke to the media, they said, "We're with the resistance, A to Z." The elderly woman comes and says, "The resistance is everything." And then the cameraman goes over to two kids sitting on a pile of rubble, and the kids say, "We don't care as long as the boys are safe. You know, as long as the fighters are safe. This is our sacrifice." And it's, you know, nobody's in tears screaming about, you know, they know the cost and they're willing to pay the cost because this is Jenin, and Jenin has the longest history of resistance in the region, heroic resistance. I spent a lot of time in Jenin, so shout out to my people in Jenin, because it's just a beautiful place when you get to see and communicate. I mean, we talked about it earlier in the show about Abu Bakr. People living under these brutal circumstances, it elevates people, and people step up, and you see people who are performing under very difficult circumstances that are just extraordinary. And Abu Bakr is, of course, one of them. And the kids in Jenin and in all the camps are the same. So on number 12 here, Aqsa Flood put out a poster, because after you got all the human rights stuff about the raid, they put out the most significant operations by Aqsa Flood in the West Bank during the Horror of the Camps battle. In Jenin, 51 direct armed clashes, 3 ambushes of infantry forces. So those are lured into, like in Jenin, famously in the 2002 invasion, the Battle of Jenin, they were lured into what was called the bathtub, into an alleyway. A teenage boy lured the soldiers into an alleyway, and 8 of them were killed. And that's what made the Israelis lose their mind and bulldoze the entire camp, because they couldn't defeat the fighters. So they just dropped the houses on top of them. So 51 direct attacks, gunfights in Jenin, 3 ambushes, 36 explosive devices, IEDs, detonated by vehicles. So those are detonated by vehicles versus sapped. The Israeli military would have sapped an additional number of them and put them out of service. So they're identifying 36 successful IED hits on armored vehicles. Tulkarm, 30 direct firefights, 3 ambushes, 27 IEDs, 2 sniping operations in different missions. So that's interesting. A sniping weapon in the West Bank is interesting. It's probably a World War II era sniping weapon, as we saw with the Mujahid, the lone Mujahid in the Ramallah area, who carried out those sniping attacks with World War II weapons, with like the Enfield rifle, and also downing a drone in Tulkarm. Nablus, 2 explosive devices, 8 armed confrontations, and Tubas the same, an IED in Tubas against an enemy vehicle and foot force, and 8 direct armed struggle clashes. And just for history's sake, just to note the passage of time and the continuation of the resistance of the Palestinians, Zakaria Zubeidi's son was killed. Zakaria Zubeidi was the commander of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in Jenin, one of the most famous commanders of the Second Intifada. He was then imprisoned and broke out of prison, Gilboa prison, 2 or 3 years ago back, when the 6 of them with the spoon broke out. Zakaria Zubeidi and 5 Islamic Jihad fighters from Jenin broke out of that prison using a spoon. And also that Hamdi Karan's son was killed during this. Hamdi Karan was the assassin of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿. He is a far-right Israeli minister who was killed in retaliation for the assassination of Abu Ali Mustafa, who was killed in his Palestinian Legislative Council office in Ramallah by helicopter gunship. So that's the West Bank. We will go now to Lebanon for a little quick tour of Lebanon. I stitched these videos together because I think they basically all show the same thing. and they don't require much explanation. But if we start with number 20, we're going to see Hezbollah rocket attacks that have escalated. Most of what we're seeing here are Grad. Generally, they're called Katyushas. If they were coming out of Gaza, we'd call them Qassam rockets. And in Lebanon, we call them Katyushas. They're basically Grad rockets, 122 millimeter Grad rockets, Soviet rockets, very common rockets. But you will see the heavier, a couple heavier ones. They have a Burkan heavy rocket that you'll see coming up here. But this is part of what the Shabak this week, Israel's internal security, posted numbers of the number of rocket attacks. And the month of August was 1,307 attacks, so more than 40 a day, versus July, which was 1,100. So 200 increase from August to July, 200 increase from June to July. May had 1,000, April 755, March 755. So they're turning up the gas, double the rocket fire from April to August. And so that's what we're seeing here, hitting settlements. They say they've hit 422 settlements, 198 military sites, 391 military barracks, 102 bases, 59 that's for drones. So, and 1,328 border posts that they hit. So yeah, these are using weapons that are Soviet era weapons. That looks like that's the Burkan heavy rocket, sometimes called the Falak 2 rocket. And the settlement committee, the settlement councils, that's like their mayors in the north, they were told to prepare for 6 more months of fighting in Lebanon. That people who are out of their homes, because there's 50 villages and settlements that are completely abandoned in the north. The buffer zone is inside Israel. And so people are being told to prepare for 6 more months. And 𝐄𝐥𝐞 𝐄𝐿, again, he said that he was just up on the border the other day, saying that the center of gravity is moving to the north. We are nearing completion of our mission in the south, but we have a task here that has to be carried out, and our mission is to change the security situation for the residents in the north. We are finishing training an entire order of battle for a ground operation in Lebanon in all its respects, Gallant said. I've already seen in many circumstances where I stood next to soldiers who told me, "You are just talking." After a week, I met with them on the ground. So he's telling them that soldiers are just talking to them. He thinks it's all talk. The soldiers don't believe there's going to be an invasion of Lebanon. The United States Central Command Chief, who's responsible for the Middle East, Michael Kurilla, he was in Israel this week, the last 2 days. And they're talking about focusing on current threats, planning the war for Lebanon and what to do with Iran and Lebanon on the northern border. So it sounds like they're at least talking about pushing war in Lebanon. We've noted on this program before that that's probably an extremely bad idea for Israel to do. I'm not going to give Israel military advice, so I won't press that too heavy. But Hezbollah has the capacity that they're not showing us here. They're just showing us this is just medium range rockets, rocket fire that could go on. They can fire rockets like this. Hezbollah committed to supporting Gaza until there's a ceasefire. When there's a ceasefire, Hezbollah will stop. They've said it straightforward. But Hezbollah has the capacity, 200,000 rockets. When you're firing 1,000 in a month, there's a long time, 20 years. That you could be firing, if that math was right, that you could be firing and carrying on this level of war of attrition, of dialing up the escalation ladder one by one. And we know these hit. They also set off the alarms that we see. So lots of interesting footage here. So this is all footage from since the beginning of September, and I stitched them together. The bases aren't. Actually, I might did I skip the maps? Maybe after this we could go to the maps. Yeah. Thanks. Nice tomorrow. So this is where the if you see the Hezbollah, Israel's blue, Hezbollah's red, you can see that the attacks are spread out pretty much right across the border. They're heavier in the Galilee Panhandle, where 𝐄 𝐄𝐥𝐿 sticks up in the top there that you can see on the map. And if you do the one before it tomorrow, you can just see who's actually attacking who. I think these numbers are a little off. Hezbollah claims 2,500 attacks, and the Israelis, I think it's more like 8,000, but it's roughly the same. What you're looking at is 80% of the attacks are Israeli attacks. They're dropping American bombs all over Lebanon, mostly in the south, but the preponderance of violence is always on the Israeli side. They have as Matt said, they have the unlimited number of shipments coming to them, multiple a day, ships every week or two. And so they're able to carry out these attacks, bombing South Lebanon. So let's look at 21. 21 here is anti-tank guided missile strikes. So we're seeing Conquerors systems being used here to hit these surveillance towers. And these surveillance towers are part of the electronic warfare system and jamming system that's trying to deal with the drones. It's also, the systems are systems that make it dangerous to work in an anti-tank missile unit. Because they track you, these systems track you, and then Israel's able to return fire before you can pack up your gear and get away. And we remember early in the war, Nasrallah was saying that these were martyrdom missions. These anti-tank missile attacks were martyrdom missions because of the way the technology along this border allowed the drone integration, taking the information provided by these towers, feeding it into the drones, and then the drones being able to strike the anti-tank crew. Well, that's all changed. And at one point, Nasrallah joked about how he said people said they're just towers, and he kind of gave his like wry, half smile. He said they're not towers, and they're not towers. They're very important electronic warfare positions that shape the battlefield, that allow these fighters to carry out these operations without dying, and so you can have your forces become skilled, trained anti-tank fire. And one of the reasons why they're firing on these surveillance equipment and electronic warfare equipment is because the Israelis have moved their military 15 kilometers off the border, because earlier in the war, when I was showing you these videos, I was showing you videos of the tanks getting hit by these weapons. And so they're using their lesser quality, if they were to choose their pecking order, these ones you're seeing here, these Conquerors, they're ones that they have in large numbers, and they're perfect for just picking off all of these sites. And you can see because they're wire guided or optical guided, they hit their targets. And so you can hit very specific targets. That Hezbollah is hitting these bases repeatedly, over and over again, hitting these bases. There you see, blows the top off of it. You can see the shape charge here expelling. That's the same way that the Yasin works. That footage there, where you see that needle fly out from the explosion. In Gaza, we see the explosion on the tank. We don't see the needle because the needle goes through. The sharp copper projectile goes through the tank, and that's what you're seeing when you see that system blow, and there's a line on the other side of it. That line's the deadly part. In any case, we'll see more of those in Gaza as well. So number of anti-tank guided missile strikes, 850 we've been seeing along this area. 850 of these strikes targeting bunkers, technical equipment, settlement units, military factories, artillery positions, Iron Dome platforms, we saw them hit the 2 balloons. They had balloon. Hezbollah put balloon for their airship. We saw them down the airship with a drone. So yeah, is that a loop? Are we looping here? We don't need to loop tomorrow. We will go to 22 is an Almas, and as I always tell you every time, the Almas is a top attack, top of the line, top shelf, but it's called top attack because it comes down from the top. It could be flown. You're going to watch it here come down on a military mustering point. So this is where a checkpoint and a base, and they drop that missile right on top of that base. And the Almas is a copy of a spike system that was a state-of-the-art system in 2000 that was captured in its entirety by Hezbollah in Ait Shab during the battle in the July war. And they took that system to Iran, and Iran reverse engineered it, popped it back over to Hezbollah, and Hezbollah now has this severe capability that the Israelis have been worried about for a long time. And just before we launch 23 tomorrow, give me 1 second here, because I want people to just pay attention to this video right away, because we're going to see 3 launches very quickly right at the beginning. And these launches are interesting because it's the first time we've seen on video the launch of Shahed 101 drones. And I'll get into what those are, but just watch the launch. They're rocket launched, and then their electric engine and plastic propeller that are totally vexing the Israelis. So watch these 3 get launched right away here. There goes 1, there goes 2. And there goes the 3rd. So I thought you would miss that if I didn't point that out. And then we have a little shot of them flying, and you can see they have a different wing shape on the back than the Ababil. The ones we've been showing you on this program are Ababil drones. And so these are Shahed 101s. They have increased capabilities, and as you can see here, some of them have cameras to make them a first-person view drone, FPV drone that are popular in Ukraine by both fighting forces in Ukraine. And you can, with these 101s have excellent tracking systems. You can control them all the way through. You're not just plugging a GPS coordinate in like some of the more lower quality drones. You plug a GPS coordinate in, it flies to whatever that coordinate is. They're manning these vehicles. They're changing its flight in the flight path. You can watch it happen on this one, which makes them significantly more a capable weapon. The key to this is the key to Iran's missile and drone sharing program. They're made with commercial parts. So they get the drawings come from Iran on how to make the drones. It's the same for the rockets in Gaza. They'll show you how to make them, and you make them with off-the-shelf parts. And so this drone here weighs 7 times less than the Ababil drone that has a wooden propeller. But because it's a fiberglass drone, because it's because it's got an electric motor, you don't hear the buzz like the lawnmower buzz of drones. And so these drones have been vexing Israel. They don't know how to get them down. They missed the cutoff. Hezbollah missed the 2 p.m. cutoff for the resistance report every week. But after 2 o'clock, they dropped 3 videos that'll be on the show next week, showing the use of the Shahed 101 hitting bases in northern Israel, and injuring soldiers. Again, Israel lies, covers up its casualties, obfuscates its casualties. It admits them, but it doesn't admit them in the way that Hezbollah does immediately. Hezbollah immediately admits their casualties, puts their name, puts their picture. They're proud of their fighters. Nasrallah always says that. Israel's a little less forthcoming. Sometimes in the larger operations, like there was a drone strike where 17 soldiers were wounded. And that required like a mass casualty event at a hospital that's more difficult to cover up. So that kind of information got out. But generally, they don't do their casualties very much. But Hezbollah has paid a heavy price in support of Gaza. Twice as many fighters have died in Hezbollah's support for Gaza than died in the July 2006 war. So the fighters are committed to this struggle, and they're paying for this struggle. 250 civilians in Lebanon have been killed in this cross-border Lebanon-Israel fight. And so they're paying the price. And the number in Israel, if you remove the 12 teenagers that were killed in Majd al-Shams, which is absolutely not clear Hezbollah did, you have 6 Israeli civilians have been killed, and they're killed on bases. They work on bases because Hezbollah is hitting military targets, and the other 10 were soldiers. So Israel claims those 16. So interesting developments on the northern border. More drones, more high quality drones, more attacks, and more qualitative attacks. So, and then just one more, just a shout out to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 sent a shout out to the Yemeni armed forces. Here, Yemeni armed forces in a tunnel. The Yemenis have a tunnel too. They've been building their tunnel networks. And then this is Islamic Jihad in their tunnel networks. And this is a video that's called From Gaza to Sana'a. It would probably be from Sana'a to Gaza to Jerusalem. And just in the same way that the PFLP fighters were shouting out their leaders, you see people in Gaza saluting Yemen for their support, for the blockade of the Red Sea, for the ballistic missile, the Palestine ballistic missile that you just saw there that hasn't been launched, but appears to be a long-range ballistic missile that we haven't seen used. But the Yafa drone was shown. The Yafa drone strike in July hit Tel Aviv. Messages of solidarity between the two forces. Of course, the Red Sea blockade has been very successful. Suez shipping is down 50%. The Eilat port is bankrupt and closed. That's the test launch of the Palestine ballistic missile. The Yafa drone strike was 2,500 kilometers. It traveled undetected, flew in over the sea, and hit downtown. The U.S. aimed at the U.S. embassy in downtown. But this is just a video of both of their operations, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜's operations, Yemeni armed forces, Ansar Allah operations, and the fighters in the middle of a genocide taking the time out to salute their comrades who are fighting. And as Ali said, there's been multiple airstrikes against. There are these massive demonstrations for Palestine that they have in Sana'a every week, every Friday, that get bigger every week. They started at 1 million, and now I don't even know how you could count how many there are there. It's just remarkable. So I just wanted to bring you that one because it's a nice shout out from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜. But that is the resistance report. We went from Gaza to the West Bank to Lebanon, and they're fighting on all fronts still.
Thank you so much, John. That was there's so much that happened.
Yeah,
Great stuff.
Incredible.
Great. Those first person view drones going in on those Israeli bases in Lebanon, absolutely stunning stuff. Incredible.
Yeah.
And that's relatively new. So that's new since July. What are we? I don't know time, but 6 weeks.
Yeah.
6 weeks.
That's right.
6 shows.
Incredible. And just kind of, looking at, I don't know, playing devil's advocate for the Israeli government, which sounds horrifying, but, in terms of like their ability to maintain some sort of like defensive, even the surveillance in the northern occupied Palestine, northern Israel. I mean, that's it's over, right?
Like it's in tatters. It's in tatters.
Yeah. Just absolutely incredible. So I expect more on that. Thanks, John. So we have a few things that we'd like to talk about. Other, news items that happened this week. Of course, last night I could not watch it, but there apparently was a debate between the two the two wings of the fascist parties here in the U.S.
The two wings of the genocide party.
That's right. The two wings, both, I think, competing for how more pro-genocide each of them were. That's, kind of par for the course here for American politics. Ali, you had some things that you wanted to say about Kamala.
Well, I mean, I'm sure we all have something to say about Kamala, but why don't we just look at the clips? There were a few parts where the situation was brought up in the first clip. We've got two. I don't know what order they were in the debate, because I admit I didn't watch it either. There are limits to what I'm prepared to do. Yeah. But let's run the first one, which is Kamala speaking.
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters, because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed, children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution.
Right. So as I think Aqsa said a couple weeks back, it's now the ceasefire process, right? That it was the peace process. Now it's the ceasefire process. It's the two-state solution, endless genocide. And basically what the U.S. and and its junior partner in Israel want is for just complete surrender, and that's apparently what ceasefire means to them.
Yeah, we've got quite a good comment from a viewer here on X saying they didn't fact check this. This sort of liberal fact check culture is a bit annoying quite a lot of the time, because what they're talking about. Yeah, it's very, very selective. What they say these kind of things for is just over nonsense. But this is a case where we have fact-checked what Kamal is saying, and it fails the fact-check.
And it fails in a very crucial way, because, Tamara, if you could put up the story we did back in June, and what this shows us is that Kamala Harris continues to double down, which, of course, I didn't. Oh, no, I did. There it is. Sorry. It's been a day. That Kamala Harris is doubling down on the lie, the genocidal lie about mass rapes on October 7th. And to this day, as she must know, as the U.S. government must know that there isn't evidence of a single rape on October 7th, not even one. And she continues to push that lie. So it's absolutely reprehensible. And I think a message to anyone who harbors any hopes or delusions that she's going to be any different from Joe Biden, to wake up from that.
And there's not even an allegation of a single rape on October 7th. There's no named or unnamed anonymous person who's said to have been raped on October 7th. There are generalized allegations that mass rapes occurred on October 7th, but there is never any evidence or specific names of it. Again, very similar in a lot of ways in terms of the lack of evidence and generalized claims as the Labour anti-Semitism hoax during the
It just becomes true by repetition.
Right.
Anyway, I thought that was important. But there's also And also the other thing, we've pointed this out before, using the language of empathy, that far too many Palestinians have died, as if there's a correct number who should
Right.
die, but also as if Kamala Harris and Joe Biden aren't sending the 2,000-pound bombs to blow 10-meter deep craters in El Mawasi, making entire families evaporate into thin air, as if they're just observers. And as if they're working tireless. She repeated the lie that they're working round the clock for a ceasefire when they're doing no such thing. Absolutely disgusting. But there were two candidates on stage, and the other one was Donald Trump, and we can hear from him. This is a rather longer clip and a bit of an exchange between two of them. Maybe we should play it on 1 1/4 speed. I don't know. Are we allowed to do that? But it's let's play it. And if we get too sick of it, we'll just say, Tamara, please stop it. But let's run it.
About Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population, because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
Wow.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is
All right, enough. Oh my God, I can't.
He's weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself.
Okay,
Wow.
So listen to what she came back with. She said, no, I love Israel. I have all my life. But she said he's weak and wrong on foreign policy. And remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago with the DNC, when the Democrats are running and their platform is that he didn't bomb enough countries.
Yeah.
And so she's running with that again. But I mean, Trump, of course, Trump is a known quantity, but at least he talks about ending wars. Whether he's sincere or not, and nobody can take anything he says really very seriously, but he actually talks about bringing wars to an end rather than continuing them forever, for as long as it takes, as Joe Biden always says, when it comes to the proxy war in Ukraine. And he didn't say that Israel should finish the job. I'm not saying that means anything, but I'm just saying that the language, I don't know. I get. What do you guys think?
Yeah, like part of what he said was not wrong about her going to be.
That's the thing.
She does hate the Arabs. She does.
Yeah,
she does,
he's
and she
a
is going
broken
to blow
clock.
up the whole
Yeah.
Middle East. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, if he were right that Kamala Harris being elected would bring Israel to an end in 2 years, she'd get my endorsement for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it might happen for 2 years.
I'd get
That's
on a
the
phone. I'd be one of the what do you guys
You'd be
get on?
phone
like,
banking.
phone
banking.
Yeah.
Going door to door.
Anyway, that was the highlights of the debate.
It's I don't know if anyone's seen the documentary film Idiocracy, but it would be a good one to revisit if you haven't.
Yeah, people in the comments mentioning it. Yeah.
There you go. All right. Well, hopefully enough of that for a while. I mean, we still have 2 months of this before the election, and then who knows what happens after. But unfortunately, we're going to have to be looking at that carefully. Let's talk about something that came out of ABC Australia, first major mainstream media to talk about the Hannibal Directive and how Israeli forces killed many, we've said many, if not most, of the Israeli citizens on October 7th in the kibbutz. Kibbutzim.
Yeah, we can't see the masthead here, but this is ABC Australia, so not the American ABC network, but ABC is the government broadcasting network in Australia, and is, just like the BBC and the CBC in Canada, reliably a voice of the state and the establishment. So it's quite remarkable to see that ABC Australia, national state broadcaster, is reporting seriously on the Hannibal Directive. And this was quite a long report. And if you read it, there's almost nothing in it that you wouldn't know if you had been reading the Electronic Intifada these past 11 months. They go back to many of the same sources we do, many of the same stories and episodes we do, but they're giving it the imprimatur of so-called respectable mainstream media instead of, the Electronic Intifada, who gets banned by YouTube for being correct all the time. So I just thought that was notable. And it reminded me of the story in the Times of London that we covered a few months ago, which was the first to cover the mass rapes hoax as a hoax rather than perpetuating it. So I just thought that was a significant moment. Whether it will open, sadly, I thought that the Times of London story might open the way for other mainstream media to start to debunk the mass rapes hoax. I think what happened instead is they just stopped covering it.
Yeah.
So rather than admit they were wrong and rather they were debunking it, I suspect that in the newsrooms, they saw all the coverage we and other independent media did, and they said, yeah, this is a hoax, let's just drop it. Because we saw the Israeli media pushing new sort of variations of the hoax over the last couple of months that did not get picked up in Western media as they normally would have done. So they haven't had the courage to debunk it, but they have at least not pushed it significantly further. But I don't know. I'm interested, Asa, you follow this story as closely as anyone. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, they are... we can't say for sure that they're copying our coverage, but yeah, they go back to a lot of the same sources. And the thing is, with this, it's all there. It's all been reported by us, by others. A lot of our sources come from Israelis, usually in Hebrew rather than in English, and it's all there. Like even Kamala Harris in that atrocious debate was saying 1,200 Israelis were killed by Hamas. Even the Israelis themselves admit that a small number of those were killed by the Israelis themselves. It has been reported in the mainstream media inside the Israeli entity, and it's all there. We think our working assumption, and we're making some efforts to try and quantify it more, is that it's quite possible that most of those were killed. Most of that, the dead on the 7th of October, were killed by Israel itself.
Yeah, and there's actually a new story indicating that. I mean, when you think you know everything, even more comes out. So we could show the story that appeared in the Times of Israel in the last day or two. And here you see the headline, "Report shows IDF silence on fears ahead of Nova. Failure to react." So that headline doesn't tell you much. But there was a report on Israel's Channel 12 about what happened at this so-called rave, which we've been told, and Kamala Harris, we just heard her repeating it. The story goes there were hundreds of young people and they were just dancing, carefree, peace-loving young Israelis dancing, within sight of basically a concentration camp, the Gaza Strip, a couple of miles away, when they were horribly attacked and massacred and raped. And buried in this story, the Times of Israel is citing this long report, this sort of documentary from Channel 12, which we will be watching and analyzing more closely. I'm not sure if we'll do anything on it on the live stream, but we're going to take a close look at it and see what we need to report from it. But if we dig deeper into this story, again, which is sourced from Channel 12, this is the first time I'd seen this, talking about what happened at the Nova Festival. And
yeah, me too.
It says shortly thereafter, a tank arrived to assist in, well, before I talk about that, they say there was a battle. What we were told all this time, there was a massacre. Now, what they're saying here is there was a battle, that there was hours of shooting in two directions between Israeli forces and Palestinian fighters. So not just sort of a one-sided massacre, but a battle. And then they say a tank arrived to assist in fighting off the Hamas assault, and the team inside managed to kill dozens of terrorists until being hit by an anti-tank missile. Well, we were also told that all those Apache helicopters firing indiscriminately at cars heading towards Gaza were only killing terrorists, so-called terrorists, when in fact it turned out that they were shooting at cars carrying Israeli civilians as well as Palestinian fighters, and doing so indiscriminately. And, if you're at a music festival with a tank, you cannot fire a tank shell in such a setting that is going to distinguish between so-called terrorists and anyone else there. So this looks to me like an indication. And again, I say, I had not seen before, and I asked other people who've been following this story. And Asa, again, I want to know what you think. Had you seen any report about a tank firing at the Nova Festival before?
No, it was new to me. A tank specifically, helicopters, yes, but not a tank. And I think yes. I mean, it's as you say. There's no way that kind of fire could distinguish between Palestinian fighters and the Israeli participants in the rave. And it's the thing is, the Nova Festival is kind of the key to it, is the key to gauging just the percentage of the dead, the Israeli dead, and the actual figure is, they always say, at first they said 1,400 and then now they've reduced it to 1,200, but the actual figure is 1151. But even that 1151 is we know that a large number of them were killed by Israel, and it was deliberately done. We know it was deliberately done as a matter of policy to carry out
Hannibal,
because of the Hannibal directive. Yeah. And it's the idea that there was tanks on the ground. We knew that there was battles, and the thing that one of the largest single numbers was at the Nova Festival. So the Nova, it's said to have been around 300 people killed there. So it's really key to it, I think, the Nova Festival, the dead there. But also the same picture was repeated in a lot of ways all around all of the border kibbutzim, or border's the wrong word, but the frontier kibbutzim, let's say, which is the term I've been using in a lot of my reporting. It wasn't that there was this terrible massacre that was often claimed. There were battles, that yes, the Israelis were overwhelmed by the Palestinian fighters, but there were battles. There was even at the Nova Festival, there was guards, there was security guards, there were civilians who were able to get arms, especially in the kibbutzes.
And there were soldiers. And
there were soldiers,
and
there was Shin Bet agents as well.
Yeah, and then we can just flash up, just to remind people, that story from November, Tamara, when the Israeli police admitted that Apache helicopters had been used, that at least one Apache helicopter fired on civilians at the Nova Festival. So we knew that, but the tank was new to me and new to us. So I just thought that was important. And Asa, I think we're gonna try and dig into this more.
Yeah.
So much. And just remember the hundreds and hundreds of cars that were burned beyond recognition, evidence of, of a crime that happened, that were all quickly buried in the sand by the Israelis.
Yeah, and then of course at the even the Times of Israel story, which is based off this Channel 12 report that we again I say with the caveat that we have yet to analyze it in detail, talks about this fierce battle, and then sort of casually says, and then the Hamas fighters went around raping people. Right. And none of it makes sense, because you can't, it doesn't make any sense. Doesn't add up. And of course, people will remember that the Sheryl Sandberg documentary, people who've been watching, who saw when we did the debunking of the Sheryl Sandberg documentary, The Mass Rapes, that guy Rami Davidian, who claimed to have found all these rape victims in the woods, and he was the only one there, but then he covered them all up so no one else would ever see. And then he fought off the 6 heavily armed Hamas fighters with a stick or whatever it was. So it's all this stuff that never adds up. But then you get these bits like the tank, which tells you there's something here that we need to know more about. Yeah. But anyway, like I say, we'll try and dig into that more. And then I guess just before we wrap up, Nora, I just wanted to point to a story, a big story in Israel.
Right.
We can put up the story from Yediot Ahronot. There you see the headline, IDF officer known for pulling people out of earthquake rubble, seriously injured in Gaza tunnel collapse. Well, that's not the only thing Colonel Golan Vach is known for.
No.
And I'm going to ask John a question about this in a second, but I just want to remind people who Golan Vach is. He was, as they say here, the head of the Home Front Rescue Command, the military rescue unit, which was very active on October 7th, as was Golan Vach. And we have a clip of him. Tamara, let's run the video clip of Golan Vach, and then I'll come back to the story that we did on him.
We rescued many.
And this is...
where you stand exactly. We rescued many. Where you stand exactly. We're lying 2 couples, 2 men, 2 women, handcuffed. And inside this house were another 15 burned people, among them 8 babies. They were concentrated them, and they killed them, and they burned them. Did you see? I evacuated them.
Colonel Vach made similar.
Yeah, so that's Colonel Vach. He was seen on media all over the world, Golan Vach, telling these absolute lies. Everything you just heard him say there is a lie. There were no handcuffed couples in that house. There were no burned babies in that house. So that's all an absolute lie. And our colleague David Sheen and I wrote about this, and tomorrow we can put up that story back in, when was it? Like John said, in June already. Yeah. I feel like it was a week ago, but it was in June. And we tell meticulously, really in forensic detail in this story at the Electronic Intifada, the headline there for those who are listening, how an Israeli colonel invented the burned babies lie to justify genocide. And that burned baby is, that Israeli colonel is Golan Vach. He invented these stories that went around the world to justify genocide. And that video clip is from the video that's embedded in this story, which kind of gives some highlights and a timeline so people can get that really quickly. But I want to ask John what he makes of the version. Now, there have been reports circulating on social media that say that Golan Vach was actually impaled with something, but I couldn't find any sort of really verifiable sourcing for that. The official Israeli story is that he was leading a mission down a tunnel shaft or exploring a tunnel shaft in the Netzarim corridor, and it collapsed, and he was seriously injured, but now he's fine. John, what do you make of that?
I mean, it's surprising the tunnel would collapse. Are we just going to rampant speculation? Like, that sounds like it was
your best
detonated.
guess, maybe.
Yeah, I don't think that those.
It's not rampant speculation. It's called analysis, John.
Okay, analysis. My analysis would be that was probably a booby-trapped tunnel. I've done a couple of segments earlier on about how they place weapons inside the walls of the tunnels, and that those weapons could be tripwired. They showed us, Al Jazeera showed us a documentary of it with unique, like never seen before footage by 𝐤𝐿, and I showed that on our show. They put them in the walls. They line the walls with them. I don't think they don't collapse. I mean, I think that's the thing about the tunnels. They don't collapse. They used to collapse all the time, and it was a devastating. Many years that I worked in Gaza, it was a devastating story to cover when these tunnels would collapse. But the engineering, they've learned, the lessons learned of the tunnel collapses has drastically reduced the number of cave-ins of the tunnels. Doesn't make a lot of sense that the tunnel would cave in if he's just walking in the tunnel. If it was under attack and it's a shallow tunnel, maybe. But I would say it's a booby trap in the tunnel. That would be my assessment.
Yeah, and the fact is we don't know, but I just want to read these two sentences from the report from Yediot Ahronot, from 𝐿𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, their military correspondent, well connected and well informed, and just how odd the phrasing is and sort of how little it tells us. It says, Colonel Golan Vach was seriously injured on Tuesday when a tunnel shaft he was in collapsed in central Gaza. He was evacuated to a hospital and his family has been informed. His condition is now stable. Everything is fine. Golan is feeling good, according to his family. So, yeah.
Do we also want to talk about where this happened? Because I think that's a really significant part of the story. They're saying central Gaza, but John, what do you know about?
Well, they've switched that terminology.
Yeah.
Netzarim corridor had been called the North until literally this past week, and they started slipping in that now that's central Gaza now.
Yeah.
And they're in there trying to find tunnels because they plan on having this be they don't want to have a tunnel underneath them. And they are also trying to find if there's tunnels that go from the north to the south, because that's a strategic tunnel. So it makes sense that there would be in the tunnels. It makes sense that tunnels would be booby trapped. It would make sense that the soldier would walk into the booby trap. I think all those things check out.
All right. We'll keep an eye on that, of course. We are going to just, let's look at the website. We just have a minute left. We're going to try and end exactly on the dot. But as we said at the top of the show, we have been restricted by YouTube this week, so we won't be able to post any segments of the videos here, but you can always go to our Twitter feed and watch this video if you didn't get to see the whole report. And we will have more information on how you can watch EI this week. And the best way to do that is to subscribe to our email list. So click Get Updates there at the top of the page on electronicintifada.net. We will, be in touch with you that way. Also on Twitter, of course, at Intifada. Thank you so much, Tamara. On your toes today, but as you are every day, but especially today under these circumstances. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Ali. Thanks, John and Aqsa and all of us here at the Electronic Intifada. Be sure to like and subscribe if you have a few bucks. click the donate now. Make sure that our writers in Gaza can depend on your support. And that's about it. Anything else?
And just again, lots of great stories at the Electronic Intifada. Tamara has a new piece up about the
Jordan.
reactions in Jordan to the operation at the Allenby Bridge crossing, where a Jordanian former soldier, highly trained former soldier, Maher al-Jazi, killed 3 Israeli personnel at the Allenby Bridge crossing, and sort of the political and social reactions in Jordan to that. Very interesting story, and lots of reporting again from our contributors in Gaza, and read their stories, share them, and there's so much more on the website. And thanks to everyone. We've seen lots of comments saying we should get on different platforms to avoid this kind of censorship. We are already on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch. Am I missing any others? And we are going to explore others as well. So thank you for all your suggestions. We're going to take a look at all that.
Thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week.
See you.